gaps in information. We know for sure that the transport by barges is estimated in 30 million tons a year. So maybe the uncertainty begins when we consider the analysis of the fleet. We could estimate today that in the case of bulk barges, we have 290 tank barges, 85 self-propelled vessels, but the most uncertain point has to do with the fleet of tugboats. There is something that affects the naval industry, the entry of the used fleet. The good news is that there is not a market of used tugboats. So in this sense, the ship owners who want to innovate in their fleets will have to invest in new constructions, in new buildings of ships. Moving on to the infrastructure perspective for the Argentine naval industry, in order to consider the building of new tugboats driven by LNG, allow me to share with you this theoretical exercise. First, the state develops a financing line so that the ship owners and shipbuilders can renew their fleet. And so from the legislative perspective, the Paraná-Paraguay Waterway might remember this type of area. So from that perspective, the infrastructure of the naval industry has around 17 shipyards. In a normal area, in 9 years, it could build around 108 tugboats. Next. I asked this slide from Mr. Raúl Podetti, who made a very interesting presentation, and we can clearly see the relationship among all the actors that are associated and work in the waterway. I will focus on the manufacturing of capital goods only, which are the ships. So the impact on the naval industry will be related to the reactivation of several shipyards, particularly those related to the Paraná-Paraguay Waterway. Around 666 or 640 direct jobs in 9 years, and from 2,000 to 2,400 of indirect jobs in that period. Of course, the activation of one of the most important value chains of any industrial sector, as is the naval spare parts sector. Thank you very much on my part.
Thank you, Señor Sánchez. Mr. Rosales, you have the mic to share with us Ports and Port Services perspectives. My greetings to all of you. It is a pleasure to be a part of this important session, Bolivia's perspective and the port's perspectives. Well, I would like to start my presentation by explaining why it's so important for Bolivian ports. We are on the Canal Camengo. Why is it so important to consider the environmental issue for us? This is related to our biome. We are in a pantanus biome. It includes 3 countries, Brazil, Bolivia, and Paraguay. It goes through, or it's, let's say, the spine of all these 3 countries through the Paraguay River. So within this Paraguay River, we have the Canal Camengo that has very specific characteristics and the water cycle especially.
Este canal también tiene sus limitaciones y tiene grandes posibilidades. Como dijimos, el ciclo de las aguas es
It has its
diferente del resto
restrictions
del
and
sistema porque
also its
tenemos un calado
possibilities.
mucho
The
más
water
bajo,
cycle
tenemos un
is different
ancho de
from the
canal
rest of the system
menor
because
y
our
tenemos un
depth
sistema de
is
alimentación de
much
reflujo y flujo por
smaller.
parte del
Our
río
width
Paraguay.
is
Esto hace de
smaller
que el
and the
comportamiento del
flow
canal
is
también
different
tenga una
to the
peculiaridad,
Paraguay
siendo su
River. So
sistema de
the
un sistema
behavior
mayor
of
que el
this
sistema
canal is
panameño.
very specific,
Bolivia, desde el año
which
pasado tenemos
differs from
2019 se nos
the
otorgó
other
la condición de puerto
system.
internacional
We had
y esto
last
nos
year
permite
the
o
granting
brindamos la
of
chance de
the
nacer bien,
international
nacer con
sports
pie derecho
specification. So we have to
a este
start
sistema
on
para
a
poder
right uh,
comenzar a trabajar en lo
footing,
fundamental y la relación
strong footing,
puerto-ciudad,
to be
la
able to start
relación
working on
puerto-medio
environmental
ambiente de una
issues,
forma
the
más
relationship
amigable. Por
between
eso
the port
trabajamos en
and the
tres pilares
city, the port
fundamentales:
and the
puerto
environment.
verde,
We have to make
por la
this
cuestión
a
ambiental;
friendly
puerto
relationship. We
confiable,
have
por el
to
tema de que Bolivia
have
tenemos
a
un
new
gran servicio
green
de
port,
narcotráfico
a
y estamos trabajando con
reliable
una policía
port. We
especializada,
have
con
a
perros, para poder
situation
identificar
which
las
we
importaciones nuestras de
compare it
ilegal
to
con
cancer,
ilegalidad; y
which is
puerto seguro
our
por el tema
drug
de
trafficking issue. So we need
seguridad
to
portuaria. Siguiente, por
consider
favor.
all this, and also we need to have a
Es así de
safe
que como Puerto
port,
Verde nosotros
considering all security
entendemos que
measures and
tenemos tres
safety
pilares
measures. So as a
fundamentales:
green
lo
port,
social, lo
we
económico
understand
y el
that we have to
medioambiental.
consider
Lo
three
social
important
tiene
pillars:
mucho a ver
social,
con la
economic,
cuestión
and
ambiental, por el
environmental
hecho de
pillars.
que el canal
Social
también, en el canal también se encuentran
issues
los
are
sistemas de
related
captación de
to the
agua
environment. The Tamengo
de tres
Canal have
poblaciones. Esto
the
alimenta a casi 100.000 habitantes que
capturing
se
of
encuentran en la
water
región.
from three
Entonces, aquí
populations. This
viene la principal
feeds
justificativa del por
three
qué necesitamos. No
societies or
solamente es bueno
communities,
tener
and this is the
embarcaciones
reason
como
why we
locadores con
need
energía
to
alternativa.
have
Siguiente, por favor.
vessels
Son cuatro
and
láminas.
ships and
Con
tugboats
energías alternativas, las
propelled
cuales nos
by
permiten
alternative
tener
fuels.
un canal con
With
un menor
alternative fuels,
costo de
we will
mantenimiento,
be able
con
to
una,
have a
eh,
canal
con un agua
with
más
less maintenance
apropiada, porque de
costs,
aquí nace y se
with
capta la alimentación para toda la
more
comunidad. El
appropriate
desarrollo
water, because this
sostenible
is then
entendemos que
feeding
la
the
capacidad
rest
de
of the
responder a
communities.
las
We need
necesidades
to have
actuales
sustainable
sin
development to be
comprometer
able to
el
respond to our
futuro y
current needs
satisfacer la
without
necesidad de una forma óptima,
compromising the
optimizando energía,
future of
siendo más
these
eficiente y
communities.
creando
We
un
have
ambiente
to
apropiado
optimize
en un
energy. We have to be
contexto
more
fluvial
efficient, and we have to
marítimo.
create
También
environments
entendemos de que no
in a
solamente son los
maritime
puertos los
river
que tienen que
context.
entrar en este
And we
contexto, sino
understand that
también
it's
la
not
cadena
just
logística
ports that
completa,
need to be a part of
las
this
embarcaciones,
context. The
los
entire
camiones, la
chain has to be
intermodalidad,
involved:
ferrocarriles,
ships,
punto
vessels,
a punto,
trucks,
porque si no causaría un desequilibrio
railroads,
la lucha en la
from
conquista de
site
un
to site,
equilibrio
in order
ambiental
to
apropiado.
avoid this
Para ello existen
imbalance
tecnologías en el
in
caso de los
our
puertos que tenemos
conquering
que
an adequate
implementar y
environmental
estamos implementando para
balance.
responder
We need to implement new
a este cambio
technologies
del
to be able
combustible del
to
diésel a
respond
otras
to this
energías alternativas.
change
Siguiente, por favor.
into alternative
Por
fuels such
ejemplo,
as
el
diesel
uso de
or other
scrubbers, el uso de motores de gas que tienen
alternatives, the use of scrubbers,
equipados,
the
que tienen
use
todas
of
sus ventajas
LN,
en el costo
LNG
y algunos incentivos. Siguiente,
engines
por
with
favor.
a lot of advantages
El
in
empleo
terms
de los
of
power
costs,
supply en
and
tierra para que
also
las
the
embarcaciones cuando
employment
atraquen
of the
puedan reconectarse
onshore
y
power
puedan ahorrar
supplies
tanto
on
combustible como
land
por tanto
so that
reducir sus
they can
emisiones.
reconnect
Y
and
las
save
energías renovables
fuels,
que cada
and of course
puerto
reduce
buscará cuál
emissions,
será la
and of
más
course
apropiada, más
renewable
viable para
energies.
su
All of the
situación
ports will
geográfica y
have to look for
económica.
the
En
most
nuestro caso,
feasible
estamos
or
viendo
adequate
el
one
tema
for
de
their
las
economic and geographic
energías
situation. In our case,
solares
we
para las
are
distintas instalaciones del
analyzing
puerto.
the use
Siguiente,
of
por favor.
solar energy. We have different facilities that can be
¿Qué acciones
installed
vamos a
at
tomar?
the different
Bueno, hay
ports.
muchas acciones, entre ellas las más importantes
Future
son,
actions,
primero, el tema de los
many of
residuos.
them,
En Bolivia
the most
todavía la
important ones
normativa
are
no está
to
muy bien
manage
estructurada por el tema de los
waste.
residuos, tanto sólidos como
Regulation
líquidos. Y qué
in Bolivia,
importante es
it's not
porque
well
el
structured,
tener instalaciones de
both for
recolección de
solid and
desechos
liquid. And this is
hace de que
relevant
podamos
because
captar, por ejemplo,
uh,
entre los líquidos, los
waste
aceites, los
management
cuales contaminan
facilities
mucho el tema de
allow
las
us
aguas y
to
eso hace de que
capture
el sistema de
oil
mantenimiento
residue,
sea
which
cada vez más difícil.
contaminate,
Siguiente, por favor.
and the maintenance
Sí,
system becomes harder if we do not manage this
siguiente.
properly. Next one, please.
El tema del bunkering, exigir un checklist apropiado con unas normativas
The issue
más
of
exigentes
bunkering, we need to
y más
have
completas
a
para que
specific
se haga de
checklist
una
with a
forma más
more
segura y, por
rigid and
supuesto, evitar
complete
cualquier
checklist
contingencia que pueda realizar. Siguiente.
to, of course, help us avoid contingencies.
¿Qué sistema de incentivo vamos a tener para que esto se lleve a cabo?
We
Primero,
have an
line up para ingresar
incentive
al sistema
system
Flamengo aquellas
to
embarcaciones que
fulfill
usen
this. First, a
energías
lineup
alternativas y
for
menos
the
poluentes
entrance to
serán,
the
tendrán una
Tamengo
preferencia porque
system.
el costo de mantenimiento del
Those
canal
who
es
have
más bajo
alternative
gracias a
fuels
este tipo de
will have
embarcaciones.
a
De igual manera,
priority
las
because
tarifas
the
de saque y
cost
ataque
will be
serán
lower,
disminuidos. Esto estamos
always
colocando
considering
una
that
alianza con las
the
capitanías de puerto
fees will
para
be
que
different.
estas tarifas
We are
sean menores,
signing a
porque
partnership
justamente
with the different
no obstruyen el
capitanías so that
sistema
these
y
fees will be
facilitan la
reduced
navegación.
because by
Otro
using
también es
these
el tema
alternative
de la
fuels,
cuota
they
que
enable
debería pagarse por el
navigation,
tema
and
de la
of course
captación de los
also
residuos
the
sólidos y líquidos. De
fee
esta
or
manera,
quota to
como
be
puerto,
paid for the
como sistema
management of liquid
portuario,
and
vamos
solid
incentivando a
waste.
que las
So
embarcaciones
as a port
tengan,
system,
se
we are
animen a hacer
going
este
to
cambio
promote
tecnológico para otras
and
energías.
have an
Siguiente, por
incentive
favor.
systems for
Si
vessels
puede darle
to
varias veces
want
hasta que cambie la
to
página.
change and include alternative fuels.
Bueno, es esa la visión que tenemos nosotros como desde Bolivia, con el sistema portuario
This
boliviano,
is
el
our
cual no
vision,
solamente por una cuestión
the Bolivian port
una
system,
relación
not
amigable
just
con el medio
because
ambiente, sino por una cuestión de una necesidad
of having a
imperante
friendly
para que los
relationship
proyectos que
with
se
the
desarrollan
environment,
en
but
el entorno
also
del
because
Pantanal
of an
tengan
imperative
éxito.
need
Creo que
so
muchos
that
de ellos han
projects
fracasado por la falta
within
de esa
our
relación
region are
amigable medio
successful.
ambiente, ciudad
I
y
believe that we
las
have to
inversiones
have a
portuarias.
good,
Desde
friendly
Bolivia, un saludo a
relationship
todos. Muchas
between
gracias.
investment
Una vez más,
in the
muchas
ports,
gracias a los
the
tres
environment,
panelistas por
and
sus
the
excelentes
communities.
disertaciones.
Once again, thank you very much to the three panelists for your excellent presentations. Now I give the floor to my colleague, Andres Shushny from OLADE, who's going to moderate the second block for this session. Thank you, Cristina, very much. It is a pleasure to share this panel and this session with you, a session that underscores the necessary systemic approach that must be taken in relation to changing the infrastructure in order to generate the decarbonization of the waterway transportation. Now it is my time to introduce Silvia Martinez from the Argentine Naval Industry Chamber. She is representing the naval industry. Teresa Eisenberg, Executive Secretary from the Union of Exporters in Uruguay, that represent the goods cargo operators. Also, Cesar Jose Scalani from YPF. He's going to talk about the changes in infrastructure and the energy supply perspective. So I give Silvia the floor, and then we continue with the rest. Silvia, you have the floor. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I believe that the changes that we are seeing all over the world, not only in climate change, but also in decarbonization, the IMO guidelines to reduce the contamination by 2030 is showing the importance of the decarbonization in the waterway as well. LNG is a huge opportunity. We, as a chamber, together with the Center of Fishing and River Operators, we've been working for 3.5 years to see what we can do for the country to reduce the logistics costs so that our exports are more competitive. In that sense, we found the proposal of the LNG. It is a great opportunity. It reduces logistics costs in the order of 60%. We know that in the waterway transportation, one cost is salaries and the other important cost is fuels. So thanks to LNG, we can reduce fuel costs by 62%. And another advantage is that it really takes care of the environment. Clean energies also generate jobs, and not any jobs, but important jobs, hierarchical jobs, innovation jobs. And this allows to have better salaries for a better quality of life, for a more developed industry, for a higher hierarchy of the industrial production. But we need financing, of course. We need public policies that promote, that stimulate and raise awareness. Clean energies are the modern life. Clean energies are the current fuels, and they have an advantage. The clients and the ship owners can choose what type of propulsion they need. So these challenges call for our need to adapt our infrastructure, our ports, our transporters, shippers, governments, and social stakeholders. Everybody is involved in this change of transforming our fuels towards clean energies. In the case of sustainable ships for our Navy in particular, the project that we submitted is the project of a modern tugboat. When we conducted our research study, there are some particularities for this type of propeller. So according to the need of the shipbuilder, where the tanks will be located, depending on that, we will choose the better setup. This type of propeller and this industrial configuration that Argentina has capacity to build is what makes the industry stand out in the world, reduces contamination, reduces the logistic costs as the plan is, and the construction and building of this type of fleet also creates jobs, skilled jobs for the personnel. So this is not just a gas-propelled tugboat. This propulsion configuration can also be applied to ferries, cruises. Actually, in Argentina, in the south, in Ushuaia, this type of cruises are entering the waters. Cargo ships as well, and other means of transport, like the rail in the railway system. Renewable energies in the industry in Latin America. Well, we know this is a huge opportunity. It is estimated that the markets by 2025 are going to invest $359 million. This is a market committed to climate change, and we are all upgrading and modernizing our systems. We know that in a globalized world, the role of the industry, we are talking about Industry 4.0, robotics, industrialization. So this is also our chance to be part of the value chain, the substitution of imports, the building of cryogenic tanks, new civil works, planning, so on and so forth. Next. Why do we say that Argentina can be the leader in this transformation to cleaner energies in fuels? Well, Argentina has a huge potential with Vaca Muerta field, which is the world's second reserve. We also have our know-how. We've been doing research for the past 3.5 years. We've met with YPF. YPF is absolutely interested in this project because it was able to prove that not only its own logistic transportation costs will go down, but also it can be as the supplier for the fleet in our rivers and seas. LNG is a clean fuel, is a fuel of the future. Its source is fossil fuels. It is odorless, colorless, non-toxic, non-corrosive. It is mainly composed by methane, the simplest hydrocarbon molecule. It really offers security and safety issues, and it requires, of course, infrastructure in the ports. The LNG setup is related to measures being taken by the entire fleet, by the entire sector. There are hundreds of ships under construction, so it's really something new. Of course, hydrogen-based or solar-based energy is also being studied. All over the world, the commitment to reducing the carbon dioxide emissions and combating climate change is something that unites us. We are all in the same mission, and LNG is the fuel of the present and of the future in the maritime sector. This table was compared together with our engineers and with the center with which we conduct our research, and it has to do with the daily savings and daily yield from this type of fuel. Around $9,000 are saved every day. And if we project this across the year, we are talking about $2.7 million that this type of setup provides to the waterway transportation, benefiting the entire Paraná-Paraguay waterway. So if we really want to recover the participation of the Argentine flag in the waterway, these new technologies are really worth considering. We know that fears must be overcome when we talk about this type of fuels. Ship owners and shipbuilders must really take the chance to make this change, cleaner energies. The main concern we had when we started developing this project was the supply. And that was actually a subject that we discussed with YPF, and YPF really took the commitment to understanding the supply. But there are four main systems. We already talked with this with Spain. We have the tank truck at any port, the barges that supply gas to the ship directly or supply from the liquefaction plants to a port, or the changeover of containers, which is a very fast and agile way of supplying. The globalized world is forcing us to be part of these changes, and Argentina has the capacity to make it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. I will now pass on the mic to Teresa Eisenberg from the Uruguayan Exporters Union, and she will present from the loaders' perspective. Teresa, take it away. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this session. It's very important to say, first of all, that the waterway is very important for us. The truck has to drive 23, the train 92, and the vessel around 200 to 300 kilometers. So for the exporters in Uruguay for foreign train, we use these vessels quite a lot. And the environmental program that we have at our union, we comply with the Green Seal. That means that transportation, logistics, and loads and cargoes have to follow certain standards, especially in traceability and tracking possibilities, considering always the environment. So the states, the nation's policy, Uruguay, our country, has changed its energy matrix, and it is the country with the highest proportion of wind energy, and we're also going forward with the green hydrogen, biodiesel, and solar energy. And in Uruguay, the population is now consuming and using solar energy. So welcome we welcome this change, but you need to consider that Uruguay does not produce natural gas, so we can contribute other views, because for us, we need to transport gas, pay for it, and of course, that might be then translated into the cargo costs. So we need to consider the investment costs in the naval industry, and then we'll see what's the cost-benefit ratio. But of course, we agree entirely on taking care of the environment. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It would be very interesting to see how this develops to fulfill and achieve its end goal, which is to transform logistics into something that also considers and takes care of the environment.
Thank you, Teresa. And all this route towards decarbonizing the waterway wouldn't be possible without considering the necessary supply of fuels. Now we are going to listen to Cesar José Escalane from YPF. Cesar, thank you very much. I will try to respect the time of the agenda, and I will try in 4 minutes to be able to outline the main 4 ideas which are here on this slide. So first, YPF has the vision to become an integrated energy company. So being the leader at country levels in the commercialization of fuels, we see the potential replacement of gas oil with LNG as a huge opportunity for that. And in addition to that, we take care of the environment. So compared to natural gas combustion, here we have a very important advantage. The second point is related to investments, and what I wanted to emphasize is related to the following. There are 2 parts to it. We will need infrastructure to supply the waterway with LNG, and on the other hand, we need the product itself. On the infrastructure side, when we talk about supplying the waterway, or at least the river segment per se, we are going to need warehouses, storage, pumps, all equipment pieces that have very strict specifications, because LNG must be kept at minus 160 degrees, as you know. That's no minor task. And on the other hand, where does the LNG come from? On the one hand, we can liquefy natural gas that we produce in our own plants, and that gas can be liquefied. For that, we need a facility that consumes energy from the electrical grid or using gas generators in order to liquefy gas. And on the other hand, to obtain the LNG, Argentina has an LNG import terminal that regasifies the LNG that is purchased from the world, particularly during the winter time. Another way of obtaining LNG, other than liquefying the YPF production, is by bypassing the regassing terminal and taking the gas in liquid form directly into the trucks. So again, these are the 2 ways of obtaining the product. Moving on to the third aspect, there is a path that we already know. The maritime segment and the waterway is one of the segments where we can replace fuel with LNG. And there are some pilot projects, for instance, in the transportation sector in particular, where the technology already exists in order to replace gas oil trucks and use LNG trucks. And the same for mining companies countries that don't have access to a gas pipeline. So our perforation and fracking and workover operations, those are sectors that have an energy demand that is not close to a gas pipeline. Those are opportunities to use LNG as well. And as I said before, we have experience. So this waterway segment is in a favorable position for us and with us because we've been working with this product for long. And finally, and the most important aspect, I believe, has to do with the fact that no one will build an LNG vessel unless the supply is guaranteed, is secured. So it would be the other way around. From our side, making these investments into infrastructure and production of LNG is a move that also requires a certainty and a guarantee on the demand side. So in this equation and in this stage where we are, where we still don't have the segment, we are trying to make it, it's very important to have a clear foresight in order to know prices, volumes, terms, quantities, and quality. These are necessary elements so that we can build and bring the new fuel into the waterway for the benefit of the waterway itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cesar. Well, to get the different visions of the parties involved, especially related to the modification of infrastructure, is a first step to generate a roadmap that walks in the same direction as Cesar has just specified in his presentation. So I think that this session is exactly that. The objective, the goal, was to get the vision of the different parties involved, the stakeholders, and I believe that we have achieved our goal. This needs a systemic approach. We need to debate and generate action lines. So I will conclude this session. I thank all the participants. It has been an honor and my pleasure to share this session with all of you. Have a good day. Thank you, Cristina, Andrés, and panelists.
Damos la palabra ahora a Romina Bocacce, secretaria ejecutiva del Comité Intergubernamental de
We will now pass on to Romina Bocacce, Executive Secretariat of the Intergovernmental Commission of the Waterway. Romina Bocacce, it is a pleasure for me to moderate this panel on institutional and regulatory aspects. I believe that it is essential when we implement the use of alternative fuels throughout the waterway. I welcome our 5 presenters. We will start now with Dr. Engineer Raúl Bertero. He is the president of the Center for the Study of Regulations in the Energy Sector and Energy Activities. Hello, how are you? Can you please talk about the regional regulation as a tool for the development of the PP waterway? Thank you very much. Yes, of course. I have a brief presentation. While I present, I will show you the slides. Next one, please. There is a theorem, the 3 R's for development. You need resources, networks, and rules. Networks in Spanish is redes. And in America, we have plenty of resources, lithium, renewable sources of energy, exports of all sorts. It's generous also for the networks, transportation networks networks. This is essential, and our waterway is essential. We have oil pipes that will transport fuel to different regions. We have LNG today and maybe hydrogen in the future, but we are lacking rules to make it all work. And resources are in nature, but we also have talent, natural resources and human resources. We have networks, some existing ones, others we need to build, but rules and regulations, this is what we're lacking. And this has to do with economic density in terms of what you invest to develop them and what they mean for investment. Let's go to the next slide, please. Next slide. Therefore, regulations are a tool that attract investments, because what regulations do is, above all, is not avoid risks, because they're unavoidable, economic, demand, or nature risks, but we can avoid uncertainty. Investors are used to managing risk. This is what they do, but they are not used to managing uncertainty. So regulations can do away with most of uncertainties that may exist in environmental issues. Without regulating environmental issues, there is no credit multilateral agency or entity that will be willing to support infrastructure changes or endeavors with investment. So it is essential to advance on this issue if we want to change fuels, if we want to modify our waterway. It is essential to do this to improve environmental issues. And of course, there are no advances possible if we have some coverage for safety and security issues, and also we need to regulate this. If not, let's see what's going on in the Escobar Pier. These are things that should have been defined and concluded to avoid surprises in the future, especially for investment agencies. So we must make sure a balanced distribution of responsibilities, investments, environmental liabilities, and benefits amongst the different parties involved in the waterway. This is essential to achieve consensus. Without consensus, we can have no stable regulations. Next one, please. Therefore, regulations, regional regulations, when we have different countries involved, with one country is difficult, but with more than one country, we have more difficulties that require innovation. So you have to consider that it's not a good thing to have a restrictive regulations. We need to have performance-based regulations or result-focused or oriented regulations. We need to lower CO2 emissions to an X amount. So we need to let innovation and changes generate these effects that regulations want to achieve. We need also to consider that regulations must contemplate the different current situations in different countries. One country overnight cannot change their existing regulations. We need to know the different regulations in different countries. We need to try to look for consensus and convergence in regulations. And we must also consider the relative development of the member countries to not concentrate benefits only on the most developed ones, because regional regulations must try to integrate countries and also to do away with inequalities, but always going upwards in the balance, not downwards. So this is also very important when considering regulations for several countries. So they must generate benefits for all the parties involved, and for this to take place, we need to have extensive dialogue amongst all of the parties involved, and when there is a problem, there's always a problem. We need to have a
Así
clear
que creo
mechanism
que
and
estas son
effective
mis recomendaciones.
controversy
La idea
solution
que nosotros
program
tenemos
in
sobre la
place.
regulación,
So these
y
are
me
my
parece que
general
avanzar
recommendations.
en una
Our
regulación
idea
con las
concerning
características que acabo de
regulations is,
describir
as I have
sería
just
muy
described, and
positivo
I
para entrar en las
believe that we have
situaciones
to go
que la
forward with
industria necesita.
regulations such as the ones
Muchas gracias,
I
Romina.
describe in order to
Muchas
attract
gracias a
the
vos,
investment
Raúl,
necessary
y
for our
continuamos con el
waterway.
ingeniero Carlos Braña, quien desarrolla varios proyectos en la Facultad de Ingeniería de la Universidad de Buenos
Thank you,
Aires.
Raúl. We are going to
de la
continue
Asociación
with Mr.
Argentina de
Braña.
Ingeniería
He's going to
Naval.
talk
Bienvenido,
about the
Carlos.
developments in the
Gracias,
engineering
Raúl.
school of
Nos gustaría que
University of Buenos Aires. Welcome,
nos
Carlos.
diserte sobre
Thank you,
si para tu
Romina.
visión es
We would
necesario
like
un plan maestro.
you
¿Cuál sería
to
la
share
función o
with
los
us
componentes?
Bueno,
whether
muy bien.
do you think it's
Si podemos
necessary to
ir
have a
la
master
presentación, por
plan,
favor.
and what would it be
Buenos días a
would it
todos.
be composed of? Okay,
En
let's
estos
move
5
on to
minutos
the
que tenemos
presentation first.
disponibles, vamos a intentar
Good morning, ladies
responder a
and
la siguiente
gentlemen.
pregunta.
In these
¿Por
5
qué
minutes
es
that I
necesario
have,
un plan
I'm going
maestro?
to try to answer this question. Why is a
¿Podemos
master
dejar
plan
el paso a
necessary?
GNL librado al mercado? No lo vemos posible.
Can we
No sería
let the
práctico, en
LNG
realidad. Hay demasiadas
be at the free
asimetrías,
will of the
no solamente las
market?
comerciales.
I
Tampoco
don't
vemos
think it is
ejemplos en
possible.
Estados
It
Unidos
would
como
not
lo
be
mencionaba.
convenient. There are many
Nosotros debemos
asymmetries.
coordinar entre 5 países.
We don't have any examples
Tenemos
either.
necesidades de inversiones
We must coordinate
complejas en
among
la región.
5 countries. We
Los
have
actores involucrados son muchos, empresarios, gobiernos,
complex
bancos,
investment
los bancos de
needs
fomento.
in the region. The
El proyecto
players
debe ser
involved are
interactivo con
many:
otros grandes
business people,
proyectos. Es
banks,
muy importante,
governments.
por ejemplo, con la explotación de gas,
The
claramente,
project
con la
must be
explotación de gasoductos, pero
interactive
también
and along with
con la
other
oferta
large
de
projects, for
bunkering
instance,
de
in the gas
GNL para grupos
exploitation or
oceánicos.
in the building of gas pipes,
Por último,
but also with the
el marco
offer of
regulatorio
bunkering and
que se
LNG
establezca
for
tiene que ser
oceanic
abarcador,
vessels.
cubriendo no solamente las
And
embarcaciones, sino el
finally,
servicio de tierra, el
the
personal, todos los
regulatory
aspectos.
framework
Eso tiene que
must
estar
be
integrado y coordinado entre
comprehensive
los
and must cover not only the ships and
Resumiendo,
vessels, but also the
el
ground
plan debe
services, the
considerar
personnel,
la
and that
coordinación
must be
internacional,
coordinated
la
by the 3
racionalización
countries. In
del uso de los
summary, this
recursos,
plan
la
should
integración con
consider
otros proyectos
international
y un marco
coordination,
regulatorio
the
abarcador.
rationalization in the use of resources, the interaction with other projects,
Existen
and a comprehensive
varios
regulatory framework.
estudios regionales. Dos de ellos son fundamentales. Uno
There
es
are
el
many
IDB,
studies in
el
the
Desarrollo
region that
Tecnológico
were conducted.
en
2 of them are
en esta taller,
fundamental.
y el
One is
otro
the
es
study
el
by the
estudio
IDB
realizado en Brasil por el
that
ANTAC,
has
que ha
been
sido
mentioned
presentado
during
hace un par de
this
semanas.
workshop, and the other is the
Este último
study
especialmente
conducted by
tiene muchas
ANTAC
similitudes
in
con
Brazil that was
los planes
presented a couple of
subsecuentes.
weeks
Sin
ago.
embargo,
And this
insistimos
last
en la
one in
necesidad
particular has many
debido a que
similarities with the master plan that we
hay
propose.
complementariedades
However, we
que deben ser
insist
cubiertas y
on the
además
need
en aquello en lo que nos
because there are
sumergimos
some
el estudio debe
complementarities
ser
involved,
confirmatorio, porque
and
trabajamos en la región
also in the
con grandes dificultades en
matters
cuanto
where we
a
overlap.
datos,
The study must be
en
decisive,
muchos casos son
assertive.
inexistentes las
We know
bases
that
de
in the
datos.
region we
Así
have
que esa
some
confirmación es
data
clave para
problems.
dotar de
Many
calidad
times
a las
databases
bases
are
de datos
even
que se generan
non-existent. So
en la
such
región.
confirmation is key in order to provide quality
Vamos a referir
input
a vuelo
to
de
the
pájaro
final
muy
databases.
rápidamente otros planes extranjeros que podemos usar de guía para
I
nosotros
will
el principal
quickly
es
go over
el europeo del sistema
some
de
foreign plans
información
that we
Hidrovia,
can take as a
un plan
guide.
que
The
comprende
main
la cuestión
one is the
ambiental tanto como la
European
comercial.
plan from the Rhine-Danube
Sobre la propulsión,
system. The plan involves
como
the environmental and the
los
commercial
ejes de
aspects,
ese plan, en
particularly
detalle, pero digamos que
used as a promotion and
incorporación de
commodity.
tecnología.
The pillars of
Es
the
el desarrollo
plan,
de
even though I'm not
se
going to get
incorpora
into
a
detail,
otros
have to do
jugadores,
with
la
costs,
producción de
the
prototipos,
introduction of
régimen
technology, that is to say, the
especial,
technology that
la
will be
regulación
developed
y la
will
hoja de
also
ruta
be
de todos
introduced for other
los programas.
stakeholders,
Esta es
the
la
special
estructura del programa
regimes,
muy interesante, lo vamos a dejar
the
para que lo
regulation,
vean.
and the
Acá se ve
roadmap
el
of
diagrama
the plan.
de
This
manual
is
diario,
the
que es tremendo,
program
el manual
structure. I'm
hoja
going
negra.
to leave it here for you to see it. This is the waterway that you can see up to the north in the North Sea. Allow me to share with you two more plans. One is the Japanese plan that allocates $10 trillion to transforming the Japanese energy market. And it has two main action plans. First, to establish an LNG market in Japan, and the second has to do with the development of bunkering stations. In relation to bunkering, probably we should take this Japanese case as a guide. In the US, the MARA, the Maritime Administration, has funds with credits with high subsidy rates around 75% in order to implement LNG in technological structures. So the credit is granted based on a system that can also be very interesting for the region. I'm going to mention the University of Buenos Aires master plan. As I said, it follows the line of the European plan. First, there is consideration made to the LNG propulsion aspects. There is an analysis of the economic impact, environmental impact, and social impact. It also considers the LNG distribution to the north area of the country. And it also offers a regulatory framework, everything under a methodology that finally unifies the entire effort and work and all the professionals involved in this plan. Building prototypes is an essential part of a plan. It provides very important information for the master plan to be effective. Such information should be technical, economic, must also refer to human resources and production. Particularly in the technical aspect, prototypes must be necessarily innovative. There must be an important gain other than the use of LNG just because of using innovative vessels. We are talking about 15% savings in the use of fuel, so we cannot miss the opportunity of getting these advantages, which are very strategic. So we conclude by saying that the master plan is necessary, almost indispensable. It rationalizes the use of resources and it supplements and confirms existing studies. There should be no delays. We can work simultaneously with other prototypes, and it rationalizes the regulatory framework. This is very important, so that we don't go through the experience as we have in other areas where we have a dashboard of rules which are uncoordinated. Finally, I'm sharing this publication with you. This is a longer publication. Thank you, Carlos, for your presentation. And now we continue with Mr. Raúl Podetti, who participates in many projects at the School of Engineering in the University of Buenos Aires. He's member of the Argentine Naval Engineering Association. Raúl is going to talk about the environmental and social impacts of the use of LNG in the waterway. Thank you, Raúl.
Muy buenas tardes. Es un honor para mí estar participando de este panel.
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure and an honor for me to take part in this session, which deals with environmental and social impact of the use of LNG in the Paraguay-Paraná Waterway. This research have been presented in two publications of our blue collection from the naval industries collection. And the impact that I mentioned, both environmental and social, have to do with the quantum leap between diesel and LNG in
Los
river
removedores
transport
de empuje
throughout
generan
the
una
entire
gran cantidad de emisiones nocivas
Paraguay-Paraná
con la
Waterway.
con la combustión del diésel oil. Y
Tugboats
hasta ahora,
generate
las
a
únicas
large amount
emisiones
of
son equivalentes al
harmful
uso del barril.
emissions
Sin
in the
embargo, ya hace
combustion
varios
of
años
diesel
que
oil,
existe
and
una
they are
vacuna.
equivalent to the use of
Modificando
a
el
face
uso del
mask.
diésel por GLL,
However,
se puede
a few
reducir
years back,
sustancialmente
we've
los gases
developed
nocivos.
a vaccine by
El volumen de la
changing diesel oil
próximo,
by LNG. We can
el volumen de la
significantly
contaminación
reduce
no está precisamente
harmful
calculada para nuestra
emissions,
región,
harmful
por las
CO2
similitudes con el
emissions.
caso del río Ohio,
Contamination
con
volume is
un
not
tipo de
calculated
transporte
specifically
en
for a
barcazas
region,
remotadores
but
de
we
peces
have
y sobre todo
similarities with the
prácticamente la
Ohio
misma
River
relación de
with the
potencia y
same
consumo,
type of
podemos estimar
vessels,
que
and
las
above
emisiones
all, almost
nocivas
the same
en el caso
relationship of
del
power,
Ohio
energy, and
son
consumption. We can estimate that
relativamente el
harmful
doble que
emissions
las de
in
la Hidrovia
Ohio's
Paraná-Paraguay
waterway
por la relación de
are
sus
relatively doubling the
próxima propuesta.
Paraná-Paraguay waterway.
Así, el volumen de la contaminación evitable
Next
es, en
one,
el caso
please.
del CO2, entre el 20 y el
Therefore,
9%,
the
en el
avoidable
caso de
contamination
óxidos
volume
nitrosos
in
y
CO2
sulfurosos
emissions,
entre un
it's
89 y un
around 20 and
99%,
9%.
y en el caso de las
In
partículas
nitrous
parciales
gases
del
and
71%.
sulfuric acids, up to
Sin embargo,
99%,
estudios europeos
and
indican aún mayores
particular are around
Los daños,
77%.
los daños
However,
de la
European
contaminación
studies have
vienen de dos
indicated
hay
even
daños
more
globales
production.
que tienen
Damage
impacto en el cambio
of
climático. A esto nos
contaminations can
referimos con las
be of both types:
6.550
global
toneladas anuales
damage,
evitables
global
de emisiones
impact
de CO2
that
que
have an
impactan
impact on climate
negativamente en
change.
el medio
These
ambiente.
are the
Los
6,550
impactos
tons
locales
of
son
emissions of
los que
CO2 that
tienen
negatively impact the
impacto justamente
environment,
sobre
and the
la
local
salud de los
impact,
que habitamos
which
en la
are
zona de la
the type of
las
impact that
1.400 toneladas anuales de
concern the
óxidos
health
nitrosos
of the
y sulfurosos y
inhabitants in the
partículas
waterway.
fluviales
The
generan lluvia ácida,
1,400
enfermedades de la piel y
tons
sobre
of
todo enfermedades
NOx,
cardiovasculares en los niños.
sulfur,
Según
and
la Unión
particles
Europea, casi
generate
300.000
acid
muertes
rains,
prematuras anuales se
disease
deben a
of the
esto y la
skin,
OMS
and cardiovascular
estima
and
que hay unos
respiratory
13.000 chicos
issues.
entre 1 y 3
Almost
4 años que mueren por causa de esta
30% of the diseases related to this are because of these emissions,
un
and
estudio de la Universidad de
13,000
Delaware
children die
indica que
per year
en
as a
el
result
sur de la
of
Hidrovia
these
Paraná-Paraguay,
harmful
las
emissions,
muertes
according
de
to the
750 personas en
WHO.
lo que va del siglo
In the
es
southern part
atribuible al
of our
efecto
waterway, the
nocivo
death
de
of
las partículas
750 people
materiales
throughout the
generadas
century
por
can
el
be
transporte
attributed
fluvial en la
to the
hidrovía.
harmful
Y actualmente
effect of the material
mueren 100
particles
personas por año.
generated by river transport in the waterway. And
Por eso,
currently,
este es un tema de gran
100
urgencia.
people die per year as a result of this harmful
En Estados
contamination. That
Unidos
is
y en
why
Europa,
this is
la
an
reacción
emergency,
contra
an
esta
urgency for
situación
us to
de emisiones
address.
nocivas ha sido la
In the United
generación de
States and
años de
Europe,
control de
the
emisiones.
reaction against this
Como a nosotros también nos
harmful
importa el medio
emissions
ambiente,
have
deberíamos
led to
generar
areas for
urgentemente
emission
un
controls.
área de control de
And
emisiones
we are
para
also
cuidar su
concerned about
salud,
our people.
nuestro
Therefore, we
y
should,
el
as
calentamiento global
soon as
de todo.
possible, generate areas
Para
for emission
analizar el
control
impacto social,
to
vamos a mirar
improve the
el
health of our
sistema de emisiones.
citizens
Para ello
and
es
to avoid
imprescindible
climate
entender que por
change
décadas
and
en la
global
hidrovía
warming.
se,
Let's talk about
se
job and job
impulsó,
creations and
digamos, la
employment. Throughout the
importación de
decades
buques
in the
usados,
waterway,
casi chatarra, mucho más
we have
contaminantes,
driven
que
forward
desechaban
the
los países
importation
más
of
desarrollados.
used vessels, almost
Eso destruyó
scraps,
prácticamente
which is
a los
much
arrecidos
more
de la región,
contaminated,
aún los más
contamination,
competitivos. Es
generates
decir,
more
las
contamination.
malas
And this was a
políticas
result of
la trajo
us
todo.
importing the vessels that other
Las
countries were
malas
leaving us
políticas,
out.
además de
So
contaminarnos,
poor
nos dejaron
policies
sin trabajo.
have made
Pero
a
como
negative
no hay un
impact.
mercado de barcos
And
usados
apart
de gas,
from
puede ser que ahora
creating
las políticas
contamination,
permitan que se
have
genere trabajo
reduced
en los astilleros
employment
domésticos.
possibilities. And because we do not have a used
¿Cuánto
market
trabajo?
for
Si
these
tomamos los
kinds of
800.000
vessels,
HPP
maybe
que
we
están
can
en la
generate
hidrovía
or
y les
create jobs
calculamos
in
el
local shipyards.
valor,
Let's see how
parámetro de
much. If we
productividad,
take into
sumándole
account
el gasto del gas de 20 horas hombre
800,000
por HPP,
HPs
llegamos
and
a
the
que
productivity
se
value,
pueden
adding,
estimar
of course, in the case
la
of
generación
gas,
de 1000
20 hours per
empleos de
HP,
trabajo
we can estimate a generation of 1,000 jobs throughout 8 years in a row, and this entailed 3,000 total number of jobs created in 8 years. So this is 10% of the Argentine naval industry capacity in the 80s. The 15 regional shipyards can build them, and they would generate a combined capacity of 2,000 workers, which we consider direct naval workers. So we could achieve 100% of job creations in our industry. So in this decade, we will be able to cancel harmful tons of harmful gases and reduce CO2. But the big jump forward is what we need to do to cancel CO2 emissions in order to reach true decarbonization with positive impacts on job creations, at first in the naval industry and also in the creation of biogas and other activities. Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Raúl, for your presentation, and we will continue now with Engineer John David Capraz, Professor of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, where he is the coordinator for a PhD on oceanic engineering. Welcome, John David, and we would like to talk about the different technical aspects that you think should be considered in order to assess different alternative fuels throughout the waterway, and do you think that this would be beneficial to achieve a flexible outlook?
Thank you very much, Romina, for the opportunity. I would like to expose here the strategies of the International Maritime Organization to reduce emissions of CO2 and greenhouse effect gases. Our goal is to reduce by 50% the absolute emissions of CO2 compared as a reference year 2008, as you might see here. Taking into account the inland waterways navigation, there are three ways to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions. The first and foremost involves new vessels projects and innovation of the existing fleet, since new motors are more efficient than the old ones. A second methodology is related to the operations, for example, where there are new technologies, new kinds of paint, in order to reduce the consumption of fuels and emissions. And the third is innovation in the use of new fuels, and that will be the green part of this image you see here. Among the most efficient methods, as you may see in this slide, we find the methods related to the new vessels project and the operational methods which are directly applied nowadays. Although in the future we count with the participation of the green part, where you can see there the new fuels, for example, it is interesting to mention that there are different options of fuels with zero emissions. Their availability nowadays, unfortunately, is not that wide, but I'd like to highlight certain points here, such as, for example, bio-LNG, the new fuel of zero emissions, but an excellent transitional fuel. Our specialists foresee that in future there will be not only one fuel, but a mixture of fuels towards zero emissions. Among them, you can find here bio-LNG and e-LNG,
based in hydrogen. There is a list of criteria that have to be considered in order to create a good fuel. Here we see the technical, the economic, and the environmental criteria. And here I would like to express, as per my own evaluation, what we need for the fossil LNG. Here you see that the availability is a problem that we have already solved, although the density of this fuel is lower than the current fossil fuels density. We can have half of the density in LNG compared to the current fossil fuels. The standards, applicability, technological maturity are excellent. We have hundreds of thousands of vessels using this, and security as well has been managed correctly. Operations are conducted with safety, but a potential problem is the stability of this fuel in the long term. When you supply a vessel with LNG, you will need it to be consumed fast. It's not possible to leave LNG several days in the tank of the vessels. In fact, LNG will start to evaporate, and that's a great risk to the environment if LNG is not used or burned. From the economic perspective, you know that it reduces capex. LNG needs the authorization of all the vessels and the port structure. Although we can show the VOEX, the bunker costs, this technology takes into account these characteristics. From the environmental perspective, there's a great advantage towards the local sustainability. In fact, LNG reduces emissions, the particulate emissions, and impacts on water. Although it's not the best solution for the global sustainability, because it still has carbon, and there are alternative options towards the future. Before I finish, I would like to highlight the four main points. LNG is not the only option towards the future. It is important to maintain the technical flexibility of this fuel. There's a possible solution of dual fuel motors that burn gas or fossil fuels. Fossil LNG is an excellent fuel that reduces the NOx, SOx emissions, particulate emissions, but not CO2 that much. LNG requires a pilot fuel, which is a technical fact very often forgotten. In order for you to have LNG, you need to have fossil fuels, and you need to inject that with 1%. So you need to eliminate completely the fossil fuels in that step. We also need liquefaction, which is a cost of energy. You need dual fuel motors. We need new tanks in the new infrastructure of our vessels and ports. And finally, we need a new infrastructure that has to be considered in order to implement this new fuel. The last point I wanted to share with you is related to the carbon leaks. In case of LNG leaks, this has to be studied in order to be completely eliminated, because an LNG leaks causes 25 times more damage when compared to CO2 in terms of greenhouse effect. Thank you very much Romina, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jean-David, very much for your presentation. And now we are going to listen to Carlos Weiss. He is an independent consultant with vast experience in the oil and gas sector, thanks to his professional career. Carlos, welcome. Thank you for being part of this session. What are the main challenges in security aspects? Thank you, Romina. It is a great pleasure to be part of this event. I have a brief presentation. Let's see if I can show it to you. Next slide. First of all, it is very important to remember that in terms of safety and security, there are important premises. Nothing is as important or as urgent that could be done without considering safety. Second, safety is not negotiated. And third, what is certain or safe today can be no longer safe tomorrow. So any industry, any human activity has and entails certain risks that can affect the physical integrity of workers, the environment, or causing losses in the companies. That's why safety has such an important role in each and every activity. After saying this, it's very important to establish regulatory frameworks and rules that can provide for safe systems and mechanisms in order to reduce to the minimum undesired consequences or ultimately mitigate those risks throughout the entire production chain, not only in relation to building vessels, warehouses, facilities, so on and so forth, but also safety aspects related to each and every player and activity involved in the sector. Therefore, it's very important to keep the statistics of each and every incident and event so that experts can follow those records and decide on better ways of acting and improving the mechanisms. All these can be applied regardless of the type of fuel that is used in the waterway transportation, even though in recent years in the US and some areas in the Middle East, efforts have been made to working on certain alternatives for vessels and ships. Today, I would like to focus especially on safety and LNG because I understand that this is the trend for a few years now, whether due to environmental reasons or economic reasons. And in my opinion, this is the trend that should be assimilated in the waterway too. LNG is nothing but methane natural gas, the one that we even get at home, which is cooled at minus 161 degrees and is transformed into liquid. So the volume is reduced 600 times and we are able to store and transport it accordingly. So natural gas changes its properties, but it remains colorless and odorless. Let's see if I can show you the next slide. What are the main environmental and safety standards for LNG? What we should take into account when it comes to making a decision in order to use this product. When evaporating, the LNG forms methane clouds which quickly go up into the atmosphere. LNG is not toxic. It is asphyxiating as any gas because oxygen is displaced from the area. LNG is not stored under pressure, so this cloud poses the risk of deflagration but not detonation. And finally, LNG is not mixed with water. When coming into contact with water, it just evaporates. So this sounds dangerous or risky, and in general, we must emphasize that in the, let's say, in the past years, when the operations with LNG started, some 35 accidents were reported and only 5 were severe accidents, and all of them were offshore, not onshore or on board. In general, these accidents were also involving certain technologies that are no longer used at present. These accidents, as I said, were never produced on board the vessels that transport or use LNG. There are many international safety and security codes that must be implemented when using LNG. These are regulations that establish requirements for the personnel and crew. There are also mandatory provisions for the surveillance and monitoring of each and every equipment and unit using LNG, not only on board the vessels, but also on the land facilities and centers that will probably need to be set up on the coast or on the shore. It is also very important to consider that a high percentage of accidents were and are caused by human error. In general, they are caused by an inadequate training of the staff. So the human factor is a crucial element when it comes to taking into account the waterway safety and security. So unless we have the codes, or if we have the codes but we don't have trained personnel, the whole system will be at risk. In conclusion, we can say that the main challenge that we have for the future, if we really want LNG to be included as a fuel in the waterway, we need to simplify and coordinate the different systems and operation controls so that we can reduce uncertainties and costs for companies. We need to have transparency and harmonized criteria. This is something that Raul mentioned in his presentation. The regulatory aspect is key. And finally, safety for the community, especially for those cities and towns which are located in an area of operations of the waterway. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. I take advantage of this opportunity to congratulate all 5 panelists for these brilliant presentations. I will now close this session by summarizing key ideas. Regulation is clearly an essential aspect to be able to implement the use of clean fuels throughout the waterway, and regulations must encompass several issues: legal issues, economic, financial issues, technical and security and safety issues. And why is it so important? Because it reduces uncertainty, provides what to expect. It establishes clear rules of the game. This is essential to have future planification to carry out all the required modifications and transportations. But also, as panelists said, regulations must be flexible to allow for innovation, because these technologies are dynamic, evolving constantly. Therefore, regulations are essential to go forward with decarbonization of transport throughout the waterway. Thank you very much, and we'll continue with the workshop. Thank you very much, panelists.
Bien, continuamos ahora con la sesión
We
de
will
energías
continue
alternativas hacia
with
cero
our
emisiones.
alternative
En el
energy
estudio que hicimos,
session
Hidrovia
towards
hemos
zero
analizado
emissions.
distintas
We
alternativas
have
hacia
analyzed
una transición
different
energética, por
alternatives
supuesto, en el sector de
towards
navegación, por
an
supuesto, teniendo
energy
en cuenta temas de
transition in
temporalidad,
the
oportunidad
navigation sector,
comercial,
considering
costos,
timeliness,
instalaciones,
availability,
Me gustaría
cost,
mucho conocer
supplies,
la opinión
etc.
de
We will
especialistas,
now
expertos, y tenemos
hear
un
the
panel
opinion
muy
of
interesante
experts.
que amablemente
We
se nos
have a
une hoy,
very
que le damos la
interesting
bienvenida y me
session with
gustaría presentar
panelists
para conocer
that
sus
will
opiniones en esta
give us
transición
their
energética,
point of view
específicamente en
in
el
this
sector de
energy
navegación fluvial.
transition, specifically in the
Damos la
river
bienvenida a
transport
Fernanda
sector.
Sarmiento,
I
consultora
welcome
externa de
Fernanda
Brasil,
Sarmento, expert
Pedro
consultant
Domaninsky,
from Brazil,
experto
Pedro
representante de
Domaninsky,
Paraguay, y
expert
Martin
from
Koopman del
Paraguay,
puerto
and
de
Martin
Rotterdam.
Koopman from the
Fernanda,
Rotterdam
empezamos
port.
contigo, por favor. Si
Fernanda, we
pudieras
will
amablemente
begin with you.
compartir cuál es la
Could you
visión
please
que ustedes
kindly
tienen
share
en la
your
transición
vision as
energética
to
para la
the
navegación
energy
fluvial?
transition
Adelante,
for
Fernanda.
river transport? Go ahead, Fernanda.
Good morning, everyone. As you know, decarbonization is a market trend in navigation, and we need to advance in technology. Nowadays, we have this environmental problem, and we have the Paris Agreement that helps us understand the situation. So we need to translate that preoccupation to a reduction of 50% of the greenhouse emissions gases until 2050. So we need to have a strategy to reduce by 40% up to 2030, and the rest until we reach 70%. So our worriness with the environment is translated into our society and navigation through our ports. So we need to see how to use these alternative fuels. Okay, so there are different fuels. Time is very important here. So we'll change one kind of energy in our fleet in a short period of time. And of course, that takes time, because we need to invest in our future. We need to understand the availability, certifications, safety. So in order for us to show how to reach that energetic transition, in this slide, you see a study that was conducted that shows that we need to have a gradual transition through LNG, which is a great candidate to reduce the greenhouse emissions gas up to 2040. From that year on, there will be a trend to change fuels in order to use other carbon neutral fuels such as nitrogen or others. Renewable sources still have not been updated, so we need to incorporate other kind of technology in navigation. And we also need to have pre-established norms in order to innovate and implement new technologies that have to be approved by local authorities. This table shows the results of a study that compares different alternatives, indicating the performance of every fuel, and that compares them with different parameters. So on the one hand, you see the renewable fuels that we need to see and consider in terms of maturity. And here we have two kinds of fuels, such as ammonium, hydrogen, the cost of these energies, the battery, which is a challenge in terms of navigation, the limited availability of fuels. And on the left, you see the fossil fuels that represent emissions problems. Next slide, please. Okay, so in order to sum up, decarbonization in navigation will happen anyway. LNG will help us. We need to find carbon neutral fuels up to 2050. And in the Paraná-Paraguay Waterway, we see very important potential, such as LNG, in the whole countries that go through this waterway. The challenge will be to have an infrastructure to supply their vessels with LNG. Also, to verify the importance of inland waterways, navigation, and of course, there are possibilities in terms of agribusiness and batteries. The hybrid battery is another possibility. So this is a whole challenge, but this is something that we need to consider. That's what I wanted to share with you. My next slide is just to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this conference.
Muchísimas gracias, Fernanda. Muy clara tu presentación y nos conecta muy bien con la pregunta que queremos hacerle a Pedro también. Pedro, por favor, ¿podrías contarnos cómo ven ustedes la aplicación de las energías renovables en la navegación fluvial, por favor, hacia cero emisiones?
Sí, bueno. Interesante, muy interesante la presentación de Fernanda.
Well, very interesting point, very interesting Fernanda's presentation. In the Paraná-Paraguay Hydrowave, although we have these evolutions as to the transport side, where we see that we have gone from 700,000 tons in 98 to almost 36 million tons. And this is a trend into the future that visualizes almost 50 million tons in 2030. So this brings about higher energy consumption, and this higher consumption allows us a range of alternatives or possibilities, always talking about energy, of course. We have different alternatives, but basically, in the current context that we visualize, well, one might say we have a range of alternatives, and I have to assess the different components. We need to have a timeline, we need to have different alternatives, and also the hybridization timeline. And sometimes I understand the consolidation of the spectrum of renewals. And we think it is applicable, it's feasible, even with these tugboats that you can see on screen, the solar photovoltaic energy use, not just by providing support to battery systems, but also for direct injection systems. We see a barge, for example, and we calculate almost 90, 100 HP, and in some cases with some panels, almost 150 HPs per barge of electric generation that can be complemented with gas systems or also fuel oil systems or diesel systems. So this allows this hybrid system that support and supplement cost reduction. In electromobility, has to consider the kilometer that is almost 14 cents of a dollar. The cost in Paraguay, at least. And also, in the transformation side, in electric mobility, we are talking of less than 1 cent of a dollar per kilometer. So imagine what this change would be based on renewable sources, of course, to this supplementation of the propelled systems. So we are talking about a high percentage of savings. And the studies that we've been assessing are studies that are talking about complementary systems for direct injection. In battery-driven vessels, well, that's the biggest part. But we are talking about a complementary line or supplementary line. And why do we say that it's an important possibility for us? Well, because the curve, the learning curve, based on our experience, will be improving more and more if we talk about manufactured equipment. In the tugboats, well, we see an improvement in the value scheme. So in the manufactured products, we have a curve where we have more production, the market demands more, and costs start dropping. However, in the schemes where resources are scarce, costs, as they grow, they start going up. So we will have a curve where both dots will meet, and I think we are beyond that crisscrossing of the curves. Therefore, the technology of renewables will not only be useful for the battery-based vessels, but also for the vessels of direct injections. These are new technologies. Of course, this added to the entire development for fuel cells, different types of hydrogen-based injections for propulsion systems. And when we talk about natural gas, we must also consider biodigestion or biogas, because they can also be used as contributors. So this is an entire range that has to be, of course, opened up more and more. This is all based on research. And we shouldn't restrict ourselves. We should think about the hybrid systems, conventional, traditional systems, but also with some hybrid systems. And we need to go forward in the study of new renewables, specifically applied in large areas such as the surfaces. We have like 20 or 30 barges. These are big surfaces, and we can take advantage of wind and solar energy in this part of the continent. Thank you very much for your invitation, and we will work together with our team, together with the Waterway Commission, to go forward with this great possibility of application of renewables in our waterway. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pedro, very much. And more or less in line with what you said, Pedro, and what Fernanda said before. And now I would like to invite Martin Koopman from the Rotterdam port, who's going to share with us a pilot project that they implemented in Europe, in the Rhine River, for zero emissions. And then a little bit more to the future, some innovative solutions they are thinking about in zero emissions. Martin, you have the floor.
In terms of new fuels. At the Port of Rotterdam, we are looking at all sorts of alternatives, and the first key solution that we found for inland shipping is actually the electrical solution. So what we've done is we've set up a company called the Zero Emission Shipping Company, It's gone live 2 months ago. And we aim to operate 7 electrically driven vessels on the River Rhine towards Germany within a year from now. This is the first phase, and it will be followed shortly with hydrogen on top of it, hydrogen to be used to fire fuel cells and again to drive the electrical engines of these barges. This is only the beginning, and the Port of Rotterdam has many, many more interesting solutions. So have fun looking at this video.
The climate goals cannot be achieved without the contribution of the inland shipping sector. ZES has taken the lead in the transition in inland shipping with 100% green energy and CO2, nitrogen, or particulates emissions. ZES is short for Zero Emission Services. ZES provides rechargeable energy containers for new and existing inland vessels. These containers are loaded with green energy. Once the energy has been depleted, the captain can easily switch the empty container for a full one at one of the switching and open access charging stations. The stations can also be used to stabilize the electricity network or provide electricity temporarily at a facility. ZES has a simple payment system. You only pay for the electricity consumed and the use of a ZES pack. ZES offers users a future-proof solution. For example, the ZES packs can also be used for hydrogen in the future. ZES is the result of a partnership between ENGIE, ING, the Port of Rotterdam, and Wärtsilä. These organizations founded ZES with the support of the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. Right from the start, ZES has partnered up with Heineken and its transport company CCT. Heineken, which exports around 70,000 containers of beer each year, will join with ZES for 10 years to have its export beer transported emission-free from its breweries to the Port of Moerdijk and eventually the Port of Rotterdam. In the years to come, ZES will grow with more switching and charging stations, more shipping routes, and more vessels. The ultimate goal is to achieve 100% green and emission-free inland and short sea shipping.
One of the many initiatives that we are developing, we're taking a leading role in a lot of the energy transition projects. Electrical shipping is of course the beginning. Electrical shipping, as mentioned, is of course the beginning. Next stage, as mentioned, using hydrogen. The next stage will be even longer hydrogen. For even longer hydrogen and fuel cells, hydrogen and fuel cells on top of the electrical. And we believe that this is a really good. And we believe that this is a really good solution for river transport. Also on the sea side, we're looking at alternative fuels, methanol, ammonia. We're looking at circular solutions. We're looking at we're looking at a new hydrogen backbone. Many really interesting initiatives. Many really interesting initiatives are developing to decarbonize. I welcome you all to have a look at our website. And if there is any way in which we can assist yourselves, with such initiatives, in the end, we're all living in the same world, more than happy to help you. More than happy to feel free to send me any questions. Feel free to send me any questions.
Gracias a los panelistas, muy interesantes y prometedores los aspectos que nos presentaron. Ahora pasamos al tema de financiamiento. Y para ello damos la palabra a
Now we are going to financing. Denise Ovara will be the leading expert of the IDB. Denise, you have the floor. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you very much. We would like to welcome our panelists for this session in financing. Today, we have the presence of Martin Duhart from IDB Invest, Lucia Spinelli from the World Bank Group, Enrique Rodriguez from the European Investment Bank. This session will be developed with 2 questions for the 3 panelists. And the first question is, what are the conditions that you consider are necessary to attract the funding necessary for the system, for the waterway transportation?
Let's start with Martin.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Denise.
Thank you,
por
Denise.
la participación en el panel.
Thank you for inviting me to be a
Yo soy
part of
parte
this
del
panel.
grupo
I am
BID
part of
dentro
the
de BID
BID
Invest,
group
que trabaja con lo que sería
within BID
financiamiento
Invest,
no
and
soberano.
our group works with
Y algunos panelistas ya
non-sovereign
estuvieron
financing.
comentando
And some panelists
anteriormente
have
algunas
been
de las
previously
cuestiones que serían
talking and
muy
presenting some of
relevantes
the
al
issues
momento de
that
considerar
are
un
considered relevant
financiamiento.
when
Lo primero es
getting
definir
funding.
cuáles
First,
serían las inversiones
we need to
necesarias
define
que
the
habría
necessary
que
investment
financiar. Desde ese punto de vista,
to
obviamente,
finance,
tenemos
and from that
el tema de las
perspective, of
barcazas,
course,
¿sí?
we have to
Barcazas
consider the
nuevas,
issue of barges, new barges,
sería autopropulsado, se
of
necesitaría
course,
algún tipo
self-propelled barges, and we
de
would
lo
need
que serían
some
remolcadores
sort
o
of
no. Pero más allá del
tugboats,
tema de
or
las
maybe not.
barcazas, también
But
es necesario
beyond the
definir
issue of
qué otras
barges, it's also
infraestructuras
necessary to
serían
define other types of
fundamentales al momento
infrastructure that
de
would be
impulsar
considered
un cambio
essential
de
when
combustibles
driving
en
forward
lo que
a
sería el
fuel
transporte fluvial.
transition
Por ejemplo, temas que
throughout
ya se
river
han
transport. For
mencionado en alguna
example,
medida.
issues that have
Es
been
necesario, por
mentioned
ejemplo,
to a certain extent, for example,
hacer inversiones en lo que sería el tema
to promote
de
investment
gasoductos. ¿Qué
on
inversiones serían
gas
necesarias
pipes.
en los temas
What are
de
the types of
infraestructura
investments
fluvial,
necessary for
almacenamiento,
infrastructure, especially river
disposiciones de
infrastructure,
seguridad,
storage,
cargadores? Y
safety,
para poder llevar a cabo todas
loaders,
esas inversiones,
and in order to
es necesario
achieve
tener
and
un
obtain
marco
investment,
regulatorio,
we
por
need
ejemplo,
to have
que abarque
a
a
regulatory
todos
framework
los
that
países
includes
potencialmente que podrían participar
all of the
en este tipo de cambio
potentially
de transporte.
participating
Un marco de
countries
estabilidad
in the
que
change
defina
and
qué
transition
tipo
of
de resolución de
transport.
controversias va a existir,
Definition of
qué tipo de señales de
controversy
precio,
resolution
por otro
scheme,
lado, se
pricing
necesitan desde el punto de vista
schemes.
del combustible,
Also,
cómo
from
se
the
le da
fuel
un
viewpoint,
marco
we
certero
need to assess
a
a
esas
framework that
regulaciones
provides
con respecto
certainty
al
to the
combustible.
regulations regarding
Esos son los
fuels.
temas que creo que son
These are the
valiosos
issues
al
that
momento
I believe are
de
most
considerar
valuable when
un tema de
assessing and
financiamiento.
considering
Por último,
issues related to
mencionaría
financing. And of course,
el tema
I
de los
should
barcos
not
en sí.
forget to
Están
mention
los
the
armadores,
vessels, the ships
si los
themselves.
barcos
We
se
have
construirían en la
the
región, si
ship
sería
owners,
necesario
and we need to
construirlos
know whether
fuera de la
this
región.
will
Ese
be
tipo de
these ships will be
consideraciones
built
también, el
within the
marco legal
region or
del
outside of the
financiamiento,
region, and of
son
course the
puntos
legal framework
importantes
for
a la hora de
funding
plantear un
are
esquema
crucial
de
items
cambio
that
de
should be
combustible desde el
considered
punto de vista
when
fluvial y lo que
considering
implicará
a
desde el
switch
punto
or
de vista del
modification
financiamiento.
of river
Gracias, Denise.
fuel and funding. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you, Martin. So now we are going to listen to Lucia. Thank you, Denise, very much. Thank you, the organizers, for the invitation to participate in this interesting seminar. I would like to add to the words of Martin in relation to investments and also the sequence, how will the process unfold for the investments that Martin was talking about so that investors feel attracted to be part of the system. So what are the main steps or the first steps? An interesting point is how this, let's say, possible modification of the energy has an impact in the electrical grid, in the electrical matrix, and what are the possibilities. So this is an interesting proposal. By all means, it's a proposal that everybody is considering in the short to mid term with, let's say, a more ambitious long long-term view, shifting to hydrogen or electrical, but understanding gas as a short to mid-term solution. Another point to consider is how this all plays with the gas consumption in the country, what happens with the winter peak in Argentina, what happens with the import requirements of gas from Bolivia, and how this gas demand really plays in this atmosphere of a context of local production, the development of Vaca Muerta field. So these are all topics that really should be part of the discussion and the conditions to attract financing. So this is a project that is specific to the waterway, but should also articulate and coordinate with other factors in a country that has an important gas penetration, particularly for household consumption. Again, so all these elements must be orchestrated in a coordinated manner so that these possibilities are really implemented in a way that there are certainties not only for investors, but also certainties for end users that they will have gas supply. So this is more or less what the other speaker talked about, the use of the barges, the vessels, and the gasification infrastructure.
Thank you, Lucia. We will now listen to Enrique Rodriguez from the European Investment Bank. Please go ahead, Enrique. Thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this panel. Of course, Martin and Lucia mentioned several elements, and I would like to add our perspective. And of course, this is a regional project, and funders usually aspire to get more information on the strategic aspect because these are medium long-term investments. So it is important to know about the strategy behind these specific investments. And of course, it's a regional project. Therefore, there must be a political support for this initiative in terms of integrating the main goal of this river transport and its relationship with intersectorial development of the member countries. So I believe that this is a higher level perspective. At project level, it should comply with the due diligence process, which are the usual processes in these infrastructure projects, technical, economic, and financial feasibility, and of course, the environmental aspect. This project makes a lot of sense for the environment and also in compliance with standards, international standards. Less presence of sulfur in the fuels is a necessary aspect to consider. This is something that you need to consider. We understand that these are transitional steps and they have to be sustained in the medium and long term. So we should aspire to fuels that are more reduced in their levels of carbon content. So we should go beyond gas and LNG. And of course, the regulatory framework, especially the standards and regulations that have to be specified as to security, safety, and management of the energy sources throughout the entire supply chain, end users, and the entire infrastructure entailed. So these are my comments. Thank you. Thank you, Enrique. Thank you to all panelists for sharing your perspectives on funding. And now we will go on to our second question, which have to do with the areas and opportunity that you envision for multilateral banks want to support these endeavors, these joint ventures.
Sí, gracias,
We will
Denise.
start with
Yo creo que
Martín.
este tipo de
Thank you,
situaciones
Denise.
de cambios de combustible
I
en la
think that
hidrovía
this
y que involucran varios
situation of
países
changing fuels
es
in the
una
waterway
gran oportunidad
involving
para
several
lo que serían
countries is a
los
great
multilaterales de poder
opportunity
participar
for
activamente,
the
¿no?
multilateral
Me imagino
entities to
a un
participate
grupo
actively.
actuando como
And
un
I
todo,
imagine the
trabajando
IDB, for
desde la
example,
parte
working
soberana y
as
no
a
soberana
whole,
para
working
dar
from the
complementariedad
sovereign and
a este cambio.
non-sovereign part
Desde
in
el punto
order
de
to
vista de
supplement
la parte
this
soberana,
change.
creo
And
que el
from
banco
the
podría tener
sovereign
un papel
perspective, I
importante
believe that the
como
bank
honest
could
broker
have an
entre los
important
países,
role as a
facilitando
broker among
las
the
mejores
countries
prácticas
in
y experiencias
facilitating the best
internacionales, por
practices
ejemplo, para los
and
temas
international
regulatorios,
experiences, for
para
instance,
los temas de que
as
serían
regards the
el
regulatory
tema de
framework
solución de
matters
controversias,
or the
regulaciones
dispute
comunes.
settlement
Creo que ahí el banco
matters
tiene
or
mucho que aportar.
common
Desde el punto de
regulations.
vista de
So those are
financiamiento no
elements where the
soberano, por
bank
donde yo
can
trabajo,
really
y
take
yendo
part. From the
específicamente al
non-sovereign
tema de
perspective, where I
financiamiento,
work,
creo que hay
particularly
una
matters
oportunidad
related to funding,
interesante de
I believe there
participar
is an
en el
interesting
financiamiento
opportunity
de
there
las
to
distintas
participate
etapas
in
desde el
funding
punto de vista
efforts
de la
for the
infraestructura.
various stages
Por un lado
from the
mencionábamos si
infrastructure
era
point of view.
necesario hacer
So we
inversiones
mentioned
en
at a point
infraestructura
whether there was the
terrestre, por
need
decirlo así,
to make
la parte
investments in the
de
land
gasoductos,
infrastructure, for
la
instance,
parte
in the
de
gas
puertos
pipeline sector
o
or in the port
almacenamiento.
area or in
Obviamente
the
tenemos
warehouse
experiencia
and
en
storage
ese tipo de
facilities.
financiamientos,
Obviously, we do have
pero también
experience
en todo
in
el
those
tema
type of funding
de las barcazas
activities, but also
propiamente dichas, ¿no?
in the
Son
issue of the
financiamientos muy
barges, the
específicos.
vessels per se. So these are
Hay
very
que
specific
determinar una
funding
serie de
activities.
características. Tiene que
We
tener
need to
también
determine a
un
series of
cierto tamaño
characteristics.
el financiamiento
There
para
should
que tenga
be a
sentido.
certain
Hace varios años, para poner
volume
un ejemplo,
for the funding to be of
nosotros
use.
financiamos
Some
junto
years
con
ago,
el
for you
Banco
to
Mundial,
know,
con el IFC,
we funded together with the
una inversión
IFC
muy
and the World
importante
Bank
que
a
eran
very
nuevas
important
barcazas
investment program
para
that
transportar, por
involved
ejemplo, mineral de
new
hierro en
barges
la
to
hidrovía, ¿no?
transport mineral
Y bueno,
ore
ese tipo
in
de
the
financiamientos requieren,
waterway.
como decía antes,
So those type of
muchas
funding
cuestiones que
efforts, as
tienen
I
que
said
encajar
before,
para, por
require
ejemplo, plantear
many
un
elements that
financiamiento de
must
proyectos.
fit in
También se
very
puede
well in
plantear
order to make
algo más
the funding
sencillo
worth it.
desde el punto de vista
On
de
the other
lo que
hand,
sería
a
un financiamiento
simpler
más
activity
corporativo
or a
a
simpler
armadores
operation could
existentes.
also be
Y
considered
como se mencionaba antes,
for
hay cuestiones
existing
que para
ship
nosotros son
owners, for
fundamentales,
instance.
aparte del
And there are
financiamiento, la calidad
fundamental
crediticia de
aspects
los
in
armadores,
addition to
las
the
garantías que
funding,
sean
the
posibles
credit
de
worthiness of the
implementar
ship
mediante los
owners,
distintos marcos
the
que uno tiene, pero
guarantees
también
that they
desde el
can
punto de vista
provide, but
medioambiental y social,
also from
que
the
es un tema
environmental and
que forma
social
parte del
perspective. That is
análisis
no
integral que
minor
nosotros
issue
vemos
and should be
cuando
part
encaramos
of
el
the
financiamiento
integral
de un proyecto no
analysis that we
soberano.
make
Así que con
when
esto
we really
te
address
paso la
a
palabra, Denise,
non-sovereign
así
project. So with this,
permitimos que
Denise, you have
también
the
complementes
floor
los otros
again
expositores.
so that
Gracias.
my colleagues can also continue. Thank you, Martin. So now we would like to listen to Lucia with the perspective of the World Bank.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Martin. I agree with Martin. These are issues where multilateral banks can contribute at different instances, of course, as a World Bank. As Martin mentioned, we have two sides, the World Bank that operates with the sovereign part with the states, the countries, and the non-sovereign side, which operates with the private sector. So what is it that the World Bank Group can do? The important thing here is the global vision to frame this within a regional development framework and see how this would impact in the Mesopotamia, the littoral area. What impact would a fuel change have, something that goes beyond the waterway itself? So this would be a global vision of regional development, including economic and social factors, so that there could be a trickle down or a spill down in the local areas, which is something that we are used to doing. We need to see the big picture to see how each of the areas play out within the general framework. Also, strategic and regulatory issues are important, sustainability issues, these are all issues that can be channeled through the technical assistance side. We usually apply to different funds for energy issues, or maybe we can find in some of these specific funds some room to apply specific funding, of course, something that is quite restricted in size, but very specific for issues that can contribute to the waterway development. And of course, if the member countries think that this is a priority, then we can have a larger scale funding, as Martin was saying. But there are different possibilities. We can have a big, large scheme, if this is something that is picked up by the government, or more specific sectorial issues such as transportation, energy, through the specific funds, of course, always within the energy transition viewpoint, going forward in sustainability, which are things that the World Bank always supports. Thank you very much, Lucia. And now we will have the word of Enrique Rodriguez from the European Investment Bank.
Thank you very much. Well, from the European Investment Bank, this is another opportunity that would very well align to our interests outside Europe. It's true that 80–90% of our business is in Europe, but the 10% which is outside of Europe has a very strong focal point in reducing greenhouse gases, in preserving the climate, and we are very strict towards the environmental impact and climate impact implications. And that would also apply to this case, of course, considering everything that was expressed before. In general, we usually offer what any bank offers and lends, but also guarantees. We require support from the European Commission in order to offer lending and also softening of our financial resources, subsidies and grants in funding. For example, if the waterway decided to explore the next steps, that is to say, the intermediate stage and transition stage, and if it wanted to explore the use of methanol, methane, hydrogen, we are confident that the European Commission would welcome supporting those endeavors, not only with financial resources, but also with advisory, which is the third pillar of the interventions we have. And in terms of advisory, we have very concrete interventions. We've been working the activities in the Rhine and in the Danube rivers that have very similar characteristics as those of the Paraguay Waterway. But we also try to offer the 2.0 version, as I say, in our projects. That is to say, not only limited to a specific project, but, for instance, addressing other cross-sector aspects of the projects. For instance, how can the investment be adapted to climate change? How can we associate the waterway operation that prevents flooding, or the alternative business that is related to the use of basins, including the tourist aspect as well. So we try to address our operations in a comprehensive and overall manner whenever we take part in a project. And to conclude, I would like to express that we are very happy to cooperate with other multilateral agencies outside of Europe and also with the World Bank, with our counterparts in Latin America. We feel very, very comfortable sharing our efforts and expanding our efforts with other agencies. Thank you. Thank you very much, Enrique. So now we are going to close this session, and I would like to confirm the key role of funding in the development of the waterway. We were able to share the challenges and opportunities that are emerging for our institutions, such as those from a multilateral bank. Thank you very much, Denise. Thank you, the panelists, as well.
Now we invite Pablo Garcia, Director of the Institute for Regional Development and Integration, INTAL, for his consideration related to regional development and integration. He's from INTAL.
Thank you for allowing me to share this part of the workshop with you. It is a fundamental session for the Paraná-Paraguay Waterway, OLADE, and the IDB. It's a pity that we couldn't be in person, but I really wanted to take part. I would like to start by thanking Romina, the Executive Secretary of the Committee, for the invitation to participate and for her leadership in promoting the work of the committee, which is key to consolidate the project. And allow me to share with you very briefly what we do and how we can help, what we do in INTAL, how we can help with all the things that you've been mentioning these days. At INTAL, we are part of the Inter-American Development Bank. We are a division of the IDB, and we focus mainly on the integration projects. Our main role is to support the development of integration processes in Latin America and the Caribbean, and we do it in different ways. We generate information, we create an agenda of studies and research studies, trying to use those studies for dialogue and discussion towards decision-making processes. This is part of our work. We also provide technical and financial assistance to the countries in order to implement integration projects. We have a whole training agenda for the public sector and for the private sector too, related to the integration processes. And we also have an important agenda that is intended to get the academia, the public sector, and the private sector all together for the benefit of the projects. A few days ago, we closed a call for research proposals where we try to find out among the academia, the private sector, the public sector, trying to find out ideas to work in the post-pandemic period. And we received over 200 proposals from over 600 researchers all over the world. And today we have a huge group of people helping us think about the day after the pandemic. So one proposal that I make to all of you, why don't we think in these terms for the waterway? Maybe we can do the same thing for next year. So based on the agenda for the waterway and based on the topics that you are working on, we can do the same thing for the waterway altogether. This is the value proposition that we have at the INTAL, trying to work for a better dialogue for decision making. So in this context, the Paraguay-Paraná Waterway is for us the most relevant natural infrastructure of the southern cone. It is composed of a vital geopolitical space for our countries, becoming a key platform for the insertion of the region into the economic context. The waterway mobilizes $100 million, 100 million tons a year. It is the main route of transportation for the farming sector in Argentina via Paraguay, Uruguay, and it is estimated that by 2030 the total transported will reach 300 million tons a year. So we are talking about a huge operation, a huge success in terms of economy and trade. Now, the waterway is not only a waterway infrastructure, but it is also an open space for the development, the human development, the economic development in the areas that are adjacent to the waterway. So throughout this workshop, you've been discussing about the cases of Europe, where all the waterways have been very important, not only for trade, but also for the economic regional development. And they are key elements to the regional integration of our countries. Now, moving on to the more specific workshop topics, I think that this workshop has been vital considering the current dialogue, fuels, and the resulting decarbonization is a fundamental step in order to build an efficient and environmentally sustainable waterway. The scenario of the worldwide navigation is following that path. The objectives to reduce emissions by 50%, as set by the IMO by 2050, the reduction of sulfur, the reduction for 0.5%, and this continued and sustained transformation that the global fleets have had, migrating to liquefied natural gas. So from Intal, we have a very close approach to integration processes, and we are always trying to see how companies can participate in these integration processes. And in general, the environmental concern is increasingly present and is a differentiating element in relation to the efficiency and the location of the businesses and companies. This will be vital not only for the waterway development, but also for the regional economic growth through the waterway. In order to make headway, I believe that pushing the integration forward is key. Integration is not an end in itself, but rather it's an instrument that allows us to create common policies. Creating those policies requires technical work, but also a very important political effort. We will have to reach consensus. We know that sometimes it's very hard to agree on small things in a family, so imagine how complex it might be to reach consensus among countries, particularly in this topic of fuel replacement. But it's key that we make an effort in order to push this type of dialogue forward, in order to include technical knowledge in our dialogue. Intal is at your disposal to give you all the support that we can, as much as we can, from the technical perspective to the dialogue perspective, in order to reach the necessary consensus for the consolidation of the waterway. Without further ado, this is my message to you, and thank you once more for allowing me to participate at this event.
Thank you, Pablo, for your relevant considerations related to regional development and the economic integration of the region that these initiatives allow us to achieve.
Pasamos ahora
Now
a
we
la
will go
sección de
on
preguntas
to
y
the Q&A
respuestas. Hemos
session.
recibido
We
muchas
have
preguntas,
received
comentarios en la
several
sección de chat
questions and
y para
comments
ello
and remarks
invitamos
in
a
our
Mariano
chat.
Álvarez
So we
Wagner
invite
del CIH,
Mariano
que
Alvarez
moderará el
Wagner
espacio.
from
Adelante, por
CIH
favor,
to
Mariano.
moderate the Q&A session. Thank you
Muchísimas
very
gracias,
much, Roberto.
Muy interesante
It is
cómo va
quite
marchando
interesting to see
el
how
seminario,
this
el
webinar,
webinar.
this seminar is
Tratando
unfolding.
de recopilar un
We
poco las
have
preguntas de
received
nuestra
several
audiencia, tanto
questions
las de hoy
from
como
our
las del martes que quedaron
audience,
pendientes. Como habrán visto,
many from
muchas de
today
las
and others from
preguntas
Tuesday.
no
Many
no
of the
lograron
questions that
responder en vivo
we weren't
se fueron
able to
respondiendo
answer
en el
live,
chat. Quizás
we
tratábamos
answer them
de
through
nuclear
our
los más
Q&A
comunes y los
chat.
respondíamos acá en
We
vivo y el
take the
resto
most
iban
representative
siendo
ones
respondidas
live,
por
and
los
then
ponentes
we
nuestros a
write
través
the answers to the
del
rest
chat.
of the questions
Algunas
in
que
our
quedaron pendientes,
chat.
más preguntas nuevas.
So we will start our
Y
Q&A session
tomando
now.
una
Let's take
pregunta bastante
a
representativa
general
luego del
question
panel
which
de aspectos
represents
institucionales y
most of the questions
regulación,
regarding
voy a hacer una
regulations.
pregunta
My
para
question
Raúl
is
Vertero, del
for
Centro de
Raúl
Estudios de
Verteros
la Actividad
from the
Regulatoria
Regulatory
Energética. En realidad son dos
Activity
preguntas, Raúl.
Agency in
La primera
Argentina.
es, ¿cómo se hace
How do
para que la
you
regulación
manage for
fomente
regulations
la
to
innovación
promote
y el desarrollo
innovation
tecnológico?
and
Y la
technological
otra
development? And the
dice
other one,
si es
is it
necesaria la
necessary to
afinidad
have
ideológica
ideological
o
similarities,
si esto es una
or is
condición
it
necesaria
necessary to
para
have
la
this
regulación
sync
regional, para
in
lograr una regulación
ideologies to
regional exitosa?
achieve a
Gracias, Raúl.
successful regional
Buenas
unity?
preguntas interesantes.
Interesting
La
questions.
primera,
I
yo
would
diría
say
que
that
es
it's
importante no
important not
solo
just
que la
for
regulación
to
evite que no,
regulations to
que no haya desarrollo
avoid
tecnológico, como muchas
the
veces
hindrance
pasa,
of
sino
technical
que además lo fomente.
development,
Para
but
que
rather
no
to promote it.
no sea
It
un freno
shouldn't
a la innovación y al
be
desarrollo
stopping
tecnológico, es muy importante
technological
que
development.
la
And for
regulación no
this,
sea de tipo
regulations
prescriptiva, es
should
decir, no diga
not
tiene que hacer
be
esto, tiene que hacer esto otro,
mandatory
sino que sea
by
por resultados, lo que
prohibiting
se llama
things, but rather to
performance based,
be
basada en performance, es decir,
performance-based.
nosotros
That is
queremos
to
que
say,
se
we
baje la
want to reduce
contaminación, que se baje
contamination,
el
we
dióxido
want
de
to
tanto
reduce
valor, que se baje,
carbon
es decir,
content
que diga
or
cuál es el
CO2
objetivo que se
content
quiere
to
lograr y de
such
tal
a
manera que
level.
permita que
So
las
this will
distintas
allow
que el permanente desarrollo
constant
tecnológico busque cuál es la
technological
mejor
development
manera, la
to
más
achieve this,
eficiente,
to look
la más
uh,
económica de
for a
lograr.
solution in a more
Eso es muy
efficient way.
importante. Es muy
It's
importante
important
construir
to build
a través de la
through
regulación tal vez un
regulations and
observatorio de
observatory
nuevas
for new
tecnologías e
technologies
innovación
and
donde participen
innovation
las
with the
universidades
participation of different
de los países de
universities
la región.
of
Eso
the
es muy
different
importante, la
countries in the
actividad
region.
universitaria en
University and
detectar cuáles son
academia participation
las
is relevant
nuevas,
in order to help us
los nuevos
detect new
desarrollos que uno
developments
puede
that can be
implementar
implemented
en
throughout
Hidrovia y
the
en cualquier
waterway and
emprendimiento.
any
Y me parece
venture
que hay
for
mucho
that
para hacer
matter.
en eso
So
con la
I
regulación.
think it's something
Y respecto
that's
al segundo
important to
punto,
consider for
que es
regulations,
si la
and
afinidad ideológica es una
whether
condición
ideological
necesaria para
affinity is
una
a
regulación
necessary
exitosa.
condition
Y la
for
regulación
successful
lo que hace, en
regulations, where
definitiva, es
regulations
equilibrar intereses,
balance out
buscar la
interests
mejor
and looks
situación
for the
para
best
cada uno
situation for each
de
one
los
of the
países
member
miembros
countries of
de una
a
actividad
joint
conjunta.
venture, a
Y en
joint
ese
activity.
sentido,
Therefore, in
la
this
afinidad
sense,
ideológica no juega un rol. De
ideological
hecho,
affinity
Europa,
does not play a key role.
la integración
In
energética en
Europe,
Europa
affinity
se
in
desarrolló luego de
ideologies
guerras y de
was
todo tipo de
developed after
diferencias
wars. A
muy
big
grandes que existen
difference
entre lo que
between
piensa
what
un
one
país y
country
lo que
thinks and
piensa
another
otro
one thinks
sobre una
on a
enorme
vast
variedad de temas.
a
Y
number
sin
of
embargo, el
issues.
desarrollo
However,
de esa regulación
regulation and
avanza y no
regulations
se
development
detiene
has
y es cada vez
been
más firme. Así que
advancing
decididamente
constantly.
no hay
Therefore, there
una
is
condición
no
de afinidad
condition
ideológica para poder
for
construir una sólida y efectiva
affinity in
regulación regional.
ideologies to be able to build this integration.
Muchísimas
Thank
gracias,
you,
Raúl.
Raúl.
Muy
Very
clara la
clear
respuesta.
answer.
Definitivamente
We
entendemos
understand
que
then
es el
that
interés el que define la
interests
posibilidad de tener
move
una regulación exitosa. Como bien
our
decías, el ejemplo
achievement of
europeo
regulations, and the
muy
European
claro
example
en
is
ese
very
sentido.
clear on that.
Ahora voy a pasar a
Now
otra
let's go on
pregunta.
to the following question.
Responde
This
cuestiona un
question
poco
has to
temas que
do
se trataron en el
with
panel de ayer de
yesterday's
costos. Y la
cost-related panel,
pregunta
and the question
para
is for
Raúl
Raúl
Podetti.
Podetti.
Y
Well,
en realidad son
these are two
dos
questions,
preguntas
in
también.
fact. One
Uno
has
sería
to
cómo
do
se
to
podrían financiar,
the
es bien directa y
financing.
concreta, cómo se
It's
podrían
very concrete
financiar las
question.
nuevas
New
construcciones a
constructions
ML.
to switch to
Y la otra
LNG,
es
And
para
the
la
other one is
hidrovía
that
Paraguay-Paraná
whether for
sería
this
recomendable
PP
el
waterway
dual
it
fuel,
would
el
be
combustible
recommendable
dual,
to have
y por
dual
qué.
fuels, and if so,
Por
why?
favor, Raúl.
Please, Raúl.
Bueno,
Thank you.
gracias.
Let's
Vamos a
start
empezar
with
por la
the
última,
second
que es
question
más
because it's
fácil. La
easier.
otra,
The other
por ahí
one,
es
it's
más
more
interesante para
complex to explain. Dual fuel, in our case, I believe that it's not even an issue up for debate. And I'll explain why I say this. This is from the cost viewpoint. The offer of dual fuel is quite broad, and there's a strategic reason for this. I would not recommend the shipbuilders or ship owners to take any other option that's not dual fuel, because if you have an emergency, as Carlos said yesterday, or in light of any lack of supply, which is something that might happen in the following years, diesel will be available. So it is a strategic safety and service-based decision in this systemic analysis that we do. This is considering the main issue, which is reliability. And reliability is best achieved with dual fuel systems. Now, regarding funding, I should say that after what I consider is the key of this, which is regulation of an area that has a very strict emission control and sustained throughout time. The second issue has to do with financing. And I wouldn't say financing for the vessels, but financing for the decarbonization of the river transport. The good news is that within naval financing options, it's one of the simplest ones because it contains the elements that any naval funder loves, which is atomization and homogeneity. There are a lot of ship owners, there are a lot of shipbuilders in the region, at least 15. There are a lot of units to be replaced, which are simple, over 200 of them, which are simple, relatively simple, compared to the ships we see throughout the world. Ours are very simple. These are units that resemble each other, and they're low-cost units, between $3 and $10 million. There are not many ships throughout the world that are cheaper than these, with an average of $5 million per vessel. And they are built quite fast, because if they are inside a production system, it's just months for a tugboat, not years. Therefore, they operate within a very predictable market, specific traffic amount, geographic area, and costs and cargoes and freights. All of them are quite predictable. So these are all the things that the funding agencies or funders love, because there is no risk involved here. But there's another aspect to consider. There are three different big parts that benefit from this. The coastal states, this is a strategic service and has an impact in competitiveness. Therefore, they want to get this type of solution. There's another part that benefits, a direct part, are the loaders. These are mega corporations, Cargill, ADM, Therium. They need their products to be more competitive, and also they have to be friendly with the environment, because in such a way they can comply with what they say in their missions and vision statements. And now they have a concrete chance to make this happen, and that they are really ecological and green products also in the transport of them. And also a third part that benefits from it are the suppliers or vendors of imported equipment. 50% of the investment on these barges and tugboats and vessels are imported parts or imported equipment that come from abroad. Therefore, we have excellent funding for that. So this is a financing scheme or model. So we're saying that it's a good thing for the ship owners, who are the takers of the loan, have to participate at least in 10% of the funding, and 30% of the amount to be financed should be covered by institutions, the government, or development banks like the IDB or the World Bank, and also getting funding from this gigantic flow towards developing countries of green funds and the climate bonds. So both the government and these funding agencies or banks have environmental and development issues, reasons to fund, to provide funding. But the biggest side should come from the foreign investment funds, 60% at least, for commercial reasons, not environmental reasons or development reasons, but because it is a good business deal for them. They should sell our products because we shouldn't allow them to sell us the ships. They should sell us a Solomonic solution for them to sell us half of the ships. That is to say, the equipment on the ships. But we should build the ships using the parts and the equipment they sell us. And this is very important. This is a very important part of the funding. When I talk about the financing from international suppliers or vendors, people are surprised. In 1989, in our small shipyard in Dock Sur, in Avellaneda, we signed a contract with Germany to build a number of container carriers, and 100% of the funding was provided by the Germans, and we bought the equipment from them, and we did the engineering and labor and materials and services. And we did the same in 97 with Haltin Marine to build tugboats to be exported to Paraguay. And with Trinity Industries, the biggest barge producer in the world, we did the same thing at the end of 1999 to build serial production barges. 100% funding from them. They gave us the supplies and we put the service and the labor. In 2017, a few years back, for the Argentine naval industry, we signed an agreement with IHC so that all the vessels, all the ships in the agreement would be funded or financed by the European Economic Community if we bought the equipment from them, and the ships were built, 100% built in Argentina, but the funding was 100% provided by Europe. So it's a very interesting scheme, and it's also a scheme through which companies will have to compete against each other to get this funding. Thank you, Raúl Podetti, from the Argentine Association of Naval Engineers. Silvana asked you a question on Tuesday talking about reduction in costs. Well, we can see how everything fits together and how this is retrofeeding the system. Now, before going to the funding side of our talk, because we have many questions regarding financing and how to make it effective and how to achieve decarbonization of the river fleet, I will go now to a more provisioning or supply related question. This is for Scalani from YPF. How could YPF make sure, considering the contract already established, the production of LNG for the waterway fleet, and how long would this take to be operative if we have such a big investment?
Very interesting question indeed. Let me try to split it into parts. In relation to the provisioning and supply, YPF made a proposal, including all the input elements that I mentioned before. The idea is that YPF has a benefit in return for making the investment in infrastructure. There would be no reason why YPF wouldn't want to supply fuel upon demand. On the other hand, the contractual framework will set obligations and sanctions or certain penalties. So that would be a safe framework to work. Second, it would be very interesting to establish orders of magnitude. According to the figures analyzed by YPF in 2019, supplying the total number of tugboats with LNG would account for 1% of the country demand for natural gas. So we estimate that there will be no scarcity of the product. Also, the other demands will internally emerge in Argentina. So we see that as time goes by, we will have an entire infrastructure network of LNG. So we will not rely on a single unit to provide LNG, but rather we will have a whole network and system of LNG supply. So as the different demand points evolve and grow, we will have like a network of LNG terminals. So we do not foresee a scarcity of the supply. Now, in relation to the timeline, well, it's very hard to make estimates. We don't have accurate information yet. The time to provision and supply, but what we know and what we believe in general terms is that once all the conditions are in place and once the demand is defined, we would start the construction process, the equipment procurement process. So from the point of demand definition to the time of operation, we do not see that it will be below 1 year or before 1 year. So we are considering from 1 year onwards. That would be the term for supply. Thank you very much, Cesar. A very clear answer. Now, I would like to move on to the financing questions per se. And the first question, or rather the first two questions, are for Martín, the representative of the IDB. So one question is very specific. In your quality as representative of the IDB Invest, the private arm of the IDB. So in case there was a company that wanted to develop this type of initiatives as part of its business plan, how should it start talks with IDB Invest? Thank you for your question, first of all. Well, actually, it is a very simple step. They just need to contact us, and we are in Washington, but also, as is my case, in the office in Buenos Aires. So whenever there is a concrete case of a business that is interested, I think that we should consider certain aspects. First, it is important to think whether the business wants to start this financing scheme as a more, let's say, corporate like financing. Let's think about a company that is already operating in the waterway, for example. Well, in that case, probably that company would have some advantages, because working on the financing of a currently operating company, a company that wants to make a partial reconversion or a total reconversion of its fleet and of its infrastructure, in relation to its port or in relation to its warehouse facilities, That's one
Cuando se
thing.
trata de un
When
financiamiento
we talk about
corporativo,
corporate financing,
nosotros
what we do
lo que
is
hacemos
to
es analizar
analyze
un
a set
conjunto de
of
inversiones que forman parte
investment
del costo del
actions that are
proyecto.
part of the cost
Y
of the
podemos
project, and we
financiar
can fund
un
or
porcentaje
finance a percentage of the
de ese
total.
total. Lo
So
que
what
hacemos
we usually
normalmente
do,
es,
along
en
with the
coordinación con la
company, we
empresa,
try to
tratar de sumar otros
add other
financiadores que nos acompañen,
financiers.
que
It
pueden
could
ser
be
agencias
credit
de
companies,
crédito, pueden ser
commercial
bancos
banks,
comerciales,
whatever is
un
available.
poco lo que esté disponible.
Another point to
Es
consider
importante
is
también la
the
jurisdicción
jurisdiction, the
donde vamos a
territory where
financiar.
we are going to
Obviamente, nosotros como
grant
Banco de
our
Desarrollo
financing.
de la región
We, as a
estamos
regional
abiertos
bank, are
en todos los
open in
países,
almost every
pero
country. However,
tenemos
there are
límites
different limits.
distintos.
For
Por
instance, if
ejemplo,
we
si
finance
financiamos
under
bajo la
the
modalidad de riesgo del
project
proyecto, o sea, lo que
finance
conocemos como
modality,
finance,
our
nuestros límites son
limits are
mayores en los países
larger
chicos que
in
en
the
los países
small
grandes.
countries
Por
rather
ejemplo,
than in
si
the big
vamos a
countries.
hacer un
So if we are going
financiamiento
to
en Paraguay o
offer a
en
financing
Uruguay,
in Paraguay,
podemos
we
llegar a
can
financiar hasta
finance
el
up to
40% de los
40%
costos del
of the
proyecto.
project costs.
La
This
modalidad de
project
project
finance
finance que mencionaba
modality
recientemente
is a more
es
complex
una modalidad
modality
más compleja
that, as the
que,
name
como su nombre
indicates,
lo indica, lo que
the
busca es
purpose is
que el
that the
financiamiento
financing
tenga
has
solamente recursos contra el
resources
proyecto.
against the
Entonces, eso
project.
requiere
So
estudios
it
acabados,
requires complete and more
mucho más
profound
profundos,
studies. It requires
requiere
interacting
interactuar con una
with a
serie
series of
de
assessments and flow
análisis,
analysis,
de
of
flujos,
different scenario
de escenarios.
analysis. And then the
La
legal
argumentación legal,
documentation is more
obviamente,
complex.
más
And
compleja
it is
y
really
tiene
worth
sentido
it as long
cuando
as the
el financiamiento
financing
tiene
has a certain
cierto
volume
monto,
and
o sea,
size.
cierto tamaño. Si
Otherwise,
no, lo más
it would be more reasonable
lógico
to
sería
think
pensar en un
of
financiamiento de
corporate
tipo corporativo
financing
a una
to
empresa
a
en
company
marcha.
that
En
already
definitiva,
exists.
a
So,
nosotros como
in
Banco de
summary,
Desarrollo
we, as a
nos
development
interesa
bank,
mucho
are very
este tipo de
interested in this type
inversiones
of
que
investments
puedan
that can
tener
have
un
a
impacto
positive
positivo
impact
desde el punto
for
de
the
vista del
climate
cambio
change
climático,
by
sustituyendo
replacing
un
a
combustible mucho más
dirty
sucio con
fuel
un
with a
combustible de transición
transition
como
fuel
es
as is
el gas
natural
natural.
gas. Thank you, Martin.
Muchas
Very
gracias,
clear.
Martín. Muy claro
And
respecto de esta
the
parte. Y
other
la otra
part
parte de la
of the
pregunta, o la otra
question has to
pregunta,
do
es respecto de
with
las
the
tecnologías
technologies
que
that are
todavía no
still
están
not
maduras, como
mature,
para que
so that
reflejen
they
una baja en
really
los costos
show
operativos,
a
pero
reduction
respecto
in
a las
the
cuales no nos
operating
debemos olvidar
costs. And the
y de todos
question
modos tenemos
is,
que invertir.
what
Y
are the
dice así, ¿cuáles son
financing
las posibilidades de
possibilities of
financiamiento
pilot
de proyectos
projects
piloto
with
con energías de
top-notch
vanguardia, por ejemplo, baterías
technologies, for
eléctricas
instance,
o hidrógeno?
electric batteries? That's a great
Perfecto,
question. And as
buenísimo.
a development
Como
bank,
Banco de Desarrollo, a
in
nosotros
the issue of
el tema de las
renewable,
energías
non-conventional
renovables, no
energies,
convencionales,
we are
nos
very
interesa
much
mucho
interested in
seguir a la
following
vanguardia
the
de las nuevas
state-of-the-art
oportunidades que van
opportunities.
existiendo.
And as
Y
the
como Grupo
IDB,
BIT tratamos de
we try
una manera
to
coordinada
achieve these efforts in a
lograr estos
coordinated
esfuerzos, tanto
manner,
en la parte de
both
BID
on the
Invest
IDB Invest
como
side as
trabajando en
well as
conjunto
on the
con
side
el
of
equipo de
working together
especialistas
with
de
the
BID.
IDB
En el caso de
specialists.
BID Invest,
For
como lo que
IDB
hacemos nosotros
Invest,
es financiar
what we do is to
operaciones no
finance
soberanas, financiamos, por
companies,
ejemplo,
for example,
a empresas
under the
bajo la
project
modalidad de
finance
proyecto o bajo la
modality or
modalidad de empresas
under
en
the
marcha o
corporate
financiamiento
financing modality.
corporativo. Lo que vemos
And what we
más
think is, let's say,
sencillo
simpler
de
to
incorporar
incorporate these
estas
new
nuevas
opportunities
oportunidades
are
son
particularly
incorporándolas,
including
metiéndolas
them
dentro de lo que
as
sería
part of a
un
project. Let me
proyecto.
share with
Voy
you
a
some
poner
examples.
algunos ejemplos.
Let's assume that we
Supongamos
are
que estamos
considering to
considerando un
finance,
financiamiento
for example, a
de una planta
photovoltaic
fotovoltaica,
plant, a
de
solar
un
generator.
generador solar.
Okay,
En ese
in
caso,
that case,
y
and
depende también, y
here
ahí entra a
we need
jugar
to
mucho
consider
lo que puede hacer
what the
también
IDB
el Grupo
can
BID
provide
de
in order to
favorecer y trabajar con los
favor
gobiernos
governments or
para cambiar
in order
regulaciones.
to help
Se puede
governments
incorporar
change
el tema de
certain
baterías
regulations. We can
en un
improve
proyecto solar,
batteries in a solar
pero siempre
project, but
tiene
we
que
should
tener
always
un
follow
sentido.
a purpose.
O sea,
So, for
tendría
instance,
que
there
haber, por
should be
ejemplo,
a
una regulación
regulation in
que
place
incentive
that
a que
encourages
gente que
people
encara el proyecto, los
or
promotores,
encourages
consideren
promoters
una
to
inversión,
get
por ejemplo, de
an
baterías.
investment in
Entonces, en esa
batteries.
medida,
So if we have a
es
purpose, if
más
we have an
sencillo
intention and a rationale
incorporar el
behind
tema de las baterías
including the
como
batteries
parte
into an
de un
integral
proyecto
project,
integral.
is easier.
Lo mismo con
And the
el tema
same
del
for
hidrógeno y
hydrogen
todas las
and all the applications that are
que se
being
están
studied
estudiando, por
at
ejemplo, a nivel de
transportation
transporte.
level. So let's assume
Entonces,
that we have a
supongamos que tenemos
company
una empresa
that
que
has
tiene
its own
su propia
transport
flota de transporte.
fleet,
Sería
then
mucho
it would be
más
simpler
sencillo
and
poder,
easier as
dentro de
to
un paquete de
put that
financiamiento a esa
company
empresa,
as part of a
encarar la
financing
sustitución
package
en tramos
and to
del
include,
transporte
for
que
instance,
incorpore, por ejemplo,
transport
transporte mediante
through
propulsión
green
a hidrógeno verde.
hydrogen
Esas son las maneras que nosotros vemos
basis. So these are the
que desde
ways
el
that
punto de
from
vista
the
de
IDB Invest
serían más
perspective,
sencillas
these are the
de ir
ways that would be
incorporando
simpler
y
to
estar a la
include and
vanguardia
incorporate, to
de
be
este tipo
at the
de
vanguard
energías
of
renovables
these
no convencionales
regional,
que se
non-conventional and
van
renewable energies that
desarrollando
are
en
being
el
developed
mundo
in
y
the world,
traerlas a
and
la
we can
región.
incorporate
También
into the
tenemos
region.
fondos
We also have
concesionales
some
que hay que ver caso por
licensing
caso
funds.
si
We need to
podemos
see
aplicarlos a los
case by
proyectos
case whether we can
y de
include
esa
those
manera
into the
bajar el costo.
projects and in that way
Por otro
cut
lado, y
costs.
acá me meto en un
On
terreno
the
más
other
de
hand,
Roberto,
the
la parte
IDB
del BID
part
suele
usually
trabajar
works with
con
donors
donantes o
and
fondos
special
específicos
funds and
y
the
los
governments
gobiernos
too, in
para
order
también
to
introducir,
work on
por
the
un lado, trabajar
regulatory
el tema de
framework, as I
regulaciones
mentioned
que
before, which is
mencionábamos
a
antes, que
key
son muy
aspect because
importantes
the regulations
porque
are
son
the
las que disparan,
triggers.
pero también
But also,
en el mundo de la
in the
energía
world
también
of
hay
energy,
empresas,
there are
en
some
algunos casos
state-owned
estatales,
companies, for example, or
que,
other companies
o de otro tipo
that may have
que
a
tienen
state
mayoría estatal, en
majority,
los cuales
perhaps, where the
también el BID
IDB
trata
also
de comenzar
tries
a
to
desarrollar
start
pilotos
pilot projects in
que
order to
permitan
offer
darle más
more, let's
confianza, por
say,
ejemplo,
confidence to the
después a las
private
empresas privadas
companies to
e introducir
introducing
en mayor escala
hydrogen
el tema
at a
del hidrógeno.
greater
O sea,
scale.
el
So the
piloto
pilot
en esos
project in those
casos
cases
cumple una
has
función
the role
demostrativa.
of, let's
Es
say,
demostrar que la
proving that technology
funciona,
works,
incentivar a
showing
que
how
el
important it is
privado
for the
después
private sector
invierta.
to
O
invest.
sea, como pueden ver,
Therefore, as
a
you can
nosotros
see, we are
nos
highly
interesa
interested
muchísimo
in
poder
developing
desarrollar temas como
hydrogen
hidrógeno,
solutions,
temas como las
batteries
baterías y
solutions,
otras
and any
tecnologías
other new
nuevas que vayan
technology that
surgiendo
emerges
en el
in the
campo de
field
las
of
energías
renewable
renovables.
energies.
Y
And
para
for
eso es
that,
como
we
que
have
tenemos
different
distintos caminos que son
supplementary roads
complementarios
at
a
the
nivel de
IDB.
Grupo BID.
So we,
Tanto
on
nosotros
the
en la
IDB
parte de
Invest
Invest
side,
a nivel de
at the
proyectos,
project level, as well
como
as
en el BID
at the IDB
a nivel de
side,
trabajar
working
con
with
fondos
specific
concesionales específicos
licensing funds
para
for
temas de
topics
cambios en
related to
regulaciones
changes
o
in
efectos
regulations,
demostrativos en algunas
prove
empresas que después
to
sirvan para
promote
promover una
investments at high
inversión a mayor
scale
escala de
with the
esa
private
tecnología con
sector.
el sector privado.
We agree, Martin, that it is necessary to plant the seed, although technologies are not yet mature enough. We're a bit behind in our agenda, but I have one more question I would like to ask also to the financial organization representatives. Silvana, we talked about regional funding and regulation to Mr. Bertero, and now we will be dealing with the content of the scheme. This is for Lucia. Lucia, what's the importance of a coordinated need for regional organization and for the incentives for the region? I believe that in this project, like in any other project that involves several players, private and public players, several countries, and medium and long-term investments, we should have a clear incentive plan, coordinated plans. This is a great advantage, not just for the players themselves, but also for the agencies that do the financing, to have some feasible plan into the future to know that the standards and regulations are coordinated, that the infrastructure is also coordinated. This is an essential topic to consider, and also everything related to safety, especially when we're dealing with LNG. Of course, the answer is yes, it is a challenge that we need to face, but this will allow projects such as this one to become a reality. In the waterway, you do have this coordination instance, so it will be easier and you can take advantage of this to leverage on it. Thank you, Lucia, for your answer. I'm so sorry that we went a little bit beyond the agenda, but I thought that the regional coordination was an interesting topic, especially to get the answers from the agencies and the investment agencies. I thank you for your answers. I hope that we were able to shed some light on these topics. Thank you, Mariano. We thank the audience for the questions and remarks. We have now reached the end of our webinar, and for final remarks and future steps, and for the closing remarks of this webinar, we pass on the mic to Mrs. Bocache. She is in charge of the CIH. Go ahead, Romina. Thank you, Roberto. It is for me an honor to be closing the final session of this important webinar. I would like to share with you some ideas and preliminary conclusions after the comments we've received throughout these sessions. I believe that it is convenient to go forward with the replacement of bankard fuels that are currently used in the Paraná-Paraguay Waterway and switch to other more efficient fuel alternatives that are friendlier with the environment. Why? Because the fuels that are currently used in the waterway have a negative and adverse impact on the environment. They generate greenhouse effect gases and also harmful effects on health because of other harmful emissions such as PM, sulfur oxide, and nitrous gases. So what are the alternatives? We have to make a difference between the medium term and the long term. At a medium term, we have a good candidate to replace our fuels right now. And this is because of a series of issues. First, a lower price, therefore operational costs are reduced, and this would have a positive effect on systemic competitiveness of the waterness. On the other side, LNG also reduces different types of emissions, and of course this would also have a positive effect on the environment. And also LNG is a mature technology. LNG is now being used to propel several types of vessels and ships, and it is a resource that is generated in different regions in the countries involved. And this would have a positive impact on the environment and also on the social side. It will generate quality employment in the naval industry and in the merchant marine industry, which is the mother of many other industries. Now, regarding the long term, there are other options such as electric battery and hydrogen, especially considering the big potential of production of renewable energies in the regions like hydroelectric, solar, and wind energy sources. So we should carry out pilot, small-scale projects that would allow us to generate different types of capabilities and capacities in areas which are knowledge intensive in the region. So all of these alternatives that we have considered in the webinar have positive externalities subject to different times. And how can we implement the use of these alternative fuels throughout our waterway? Well, I believe that in these 2 days, we have made it clear that there are 3 big pillars. One has to do with regulations, clear rules, previsibility, and investment possibilities, and safety to be able to plan to carry out investments and transformations necessary. But also regulations must allow to promote the development of technologies, because these are evolving and dynamic technologies. And another important part has to do with the financing both for the public and the private sectors. LNG, because it reduces operational costs, then we could generate financial schemes that allow investments to be reimbursed with the savings. In projects related to climate change linked to renewable energy sources, have plenty possibilities of investment in different funds and agencies. And an important pillar, which we also mentioned throughout the webinar, has to do with coordination, the importance of coordinations among the member countries of the waterway to be able to advance, to work jointly, coordinating policies and strategies in communication with the different parties involved, ship owners, shipyards, loaders, ports. All of them must be involved in the process. Why do I say this? Well, because I believe that this initiative represents an opportunity for the development of our region. And as you have heard, this is a big integration and development project in the region. So this fits in this framework. Therefore, we need to have a public-private articulation that's healthy, that's intelligent through communication challenges encompassed by an institution such as CIH. What are our next steps? Well, we have created a group of experts within the executive secretariat of CIH, made up experts assigned by the different countries, and they might invite other specialists to make the dialogue even better. Our next meeting will be on November 30, and this is to present or submit different alternatives or road map to be able to go forward. This should be submitted to our executive secretariat at the CIH. I would like to thank the joint work and cooperation amongst the 3 organizations that have been part of this workshop, IDB, OLADE, and CIH. And I would like to express our willingness to continue forward with this synergy. And I would also like to highlight the commitment of Roberto Aiello, because from the very beginning, he has been working relentlessly to organize this webinar. Thank you very much, Roberto, for your hard work. I would also like to thank the panelists, to all of them, men and women who have participated in this webinar. We cannot name them all because there are more than 30, but it was a big challenge to be able to provide brief presentations with brilliant presentations, very clear presentations in such a short time. And I would like to also celebrate the number of women that have been part of this webinar, which is not something that's usual in meetings in this sector. So I celebrate women's participation. I hope that more and more women participate in our future webinars and debates. I would also like to thank Globalports for their excellent broadcasting and the technical setup that has allowed us to reach all of you in this way, and also the media that have been helping us disseminate the information to multiply our message, and the audience that has been joining us in these last two sessions with their comments and their questions. Thank you very much. We will continue working on these topics. We are here for anything you need. Thank you very much to each and every one of you.